50/50, but we're struggling with some of our students who are having less choices or finding themselves in retrieval. Credit retrieval works like this: if a student fails a class, say in their freshman year, they then have to take it again in their sophomore year, which starts to limit their schedule. So we have a program in their junior and senior year at Apex in which they can do some of that online. We're finding that some of our students are really struggling to get to the 125 because of, say, a tough freshman year or a tough sophomore year. And we want to make sure that they're credited for their work or their turnaround, if you will, as they move into junior and senior year. We want to make sure that they graduate.
And the state requirement is 120, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
For high school graduation. Okay.
So that's the reasoning behind this.
Thank you.
Why wasn't this brought to us during the work session so that we could, you know, kind of understand the ramifications, the implications of this change?
Yeah, this was brought to me this week. So,
Okay.
and I did do my research on it.
Yeah.
But we can table it. We'll be okay for April if you want to table it and have more discussion about it. But like I said, I just told you what our concern is.
Well, well, we should be fine until next year, really, right? Because this isn't effective for this June.
Yep. We're just forecasting some issues, right? You start to see a pattern, you go, ooh, maybe we have to be careful here. But we can table this. Like I said, we can table it. I'll get you more data.
Is there a
You want to
motion
see
to
some
table?
numbers?
I'll motion to table.
Yeah.
Mr.
Okay.
Nunziata?
I'll second that.
Yep.
Ms. McGee was second, even though we don't need a second.
Right.
There was no
Yeah.
discussion on the table, so we move right to a roll call.
Mrs. Bucieri?
To table it, right?
To table it,
Yes, okay, yes.
Mr. Chili?
Yes.
Mrs. Coughlin?
Yes.
Mrs. McGee?
Yes.
Mrs. Mitchell?
Yes.
Dr. Peak?
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney?
Yes.
Mr. Nunziata?
Yes.
Mr. Sparta?
Yes.
Motion carries.
2D has been tabled until
I'll update it for
April.
you.
April work session?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, you have to
Letter
file it.
E
Yeah.
is on the addendum. It is recommended that the board approve the following non-tenured non-renewals for the 2019-20 school year.
Motion for 2E, please.
So moved.
Mr. Sweeney,
Second.
Dr. Peak, second. Questions or comments? Roll call vote.
Mr. Chili?
Yes.
Mrs. Coughlin?
Yes.
Mrs. McGee?
Yes.
Mrs. Mitchell?
Yes.
Dr. Peak?
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney?
Yes.
Mr. Nunziata?
Yes.
Mrs. Bucieri?
Yes.
Mr. Sparta?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Letter F on the addendum. It is recommended that the board approve the attached transfer list for the 2019-20 school year, attachment D.
Motion for 2F, please.
So moved.
Dr. Peak, second.
Second.
Mr. Sweeney, questions or comments? Roll call vote.
Mrs. Coughlin?
Yes.
Mrs. McGee?
Yes.
Mrs. Mitchell?
Yes.
Dr. Peak?
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney?
Yes.
Mr. Nunziata?
Yes, but abstain on item 20 on the attachment.
Mrs. Bucieri?
Yes.
Mr. Chili?
Yes.
Mr. Sparta?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Number 3.
Yep, number 3 on the agenda is the discussion of policy 5561, the use of restraint and seclusion techniques for students with disabilities.
Okay,
Can
so-
we table this? Can we
What?
table 3?
Why?
Um,
It's a
Based-
discussion item.
oh, okay, so,
It's not a
We're not
recommendation,
voting
it's
on
a
oh, it's not,
discussion.
okay,
yeah.
okay.
So Teresa already kind of, updated us as to where it's at. We've had the executive leadership from CPAG come and give their view. So the situation is that we, back in the fall, as Teresa mentioned, as a board, requested to have a restraint and seclusion policy, which then moved it to this special education committee to develop it in conjunction with CPAG administration. CPAG came to us a couple weeks ago, a week ago, with concerns about the seclusion part of it. I think they kind of voiced that tonight very clearly with some evidence-based literature. So we have another meeting scheduled for Monday. So what we're looking for from the board is some direction if we should move forward with a restraint and seclusion policy or just move forward with a restraint policy. That's the discussion point. Anything you'd like to add?
Well, I mean, just to clarify, what the CPAC, I mean, as you all just heard, asked for us to, if I'm understanding correctly, discontinue the actual practice of seclusion, correct? Okay. So they're asking us to discontinue the practice of seclusion. What Mr. Sparta is asking is the policy of, do we want a policy of restraint and seclusion, or just a policy that has restraint? And maybe Ms. Davino or Mr. Sparta could discuss further. We, as the board, the committee, was told that the practices of restraint and seclusion would be happening, being utilized, whether there's a policy or not. Currently, they are being utilized, but we do not have a policy in place. This law is relatively new.
Which one?
It is only for students with special education. It does not apply to, let's say, in the high school, if there's a fight, you know, we're going to restrain these students, you know, pulling away from each other. It's not that. This specifically only refers to students in special education. That was the way the law was written. So this is where, you know, as the CPAG expressed tonight, this is difficult because we have been working together, all of us, for a long time. We've met well over 12 hours so far just working on this aspect of the policy. We had a meeting that I discussed in the past. We all got together and we went directly to the site to actually see the seclusion room. We had our board attorney with us, the CPAG was there, the teacher, administration, the committee. Lauren came because even though she's not still in the Special Services Committee, she's been very helpful from a buildings and grounds perspective and understanding, having been on special services in the past. So as a practice, and this is, you know, where it's difficult for us, and I don't know where our line begins or ends. You know, as board members, we can't run the school. We have to follow what the administration tells us. So as far as taking away the practice of restraint or taking away the practice of seclusion, I don't know if that is board or if that falls, you know, that would fall under the idea of running the school. I don't know. That's just one aspect. The aspect that we can, I know, very clearly handle is the policy. So as Brad mentioned, for the policy, restraint and seclusion or just restraint. And maybe Ms. Davino or, you know, Mr. Sparta could add anything.
Do you want me to speak?
Go ahead. Yep.
Or, I'm sorry, Ms. McGee too. I don't want to cut her out by any means.
So first, I wanted to thank the members of CPAC for being here tonight. I really wanted to express my heartfelt gratitude for sitting at the table with us, not just through this policy, but you know, through all of the things that you're doing in keeping your parents informed. And I appreciate you embracing a new superintendent who, you know, does not come from a special ed background and asks a lot of questions sometimes. But I really do appreciate that you've spoken your truth, and we've talked about that a little bit. So I appreciate that. And the other thing I'm really going to speak to is just for the members of the public as well as for the board, because we have a decision to make here, it's just the process at which law and policy occur in a district. So the challenge here, in my opinion, is that the law, which was Chapter 291, was approved last year, so January of last year of 2018. And in New Jersey, because the ladies are right, this is not the law across the nation, so I want to be clear on both sides. The law in New Jersey it is an act concerning the use of physical restraint and seclusion techniques on students with disabilities and supplementing Chapter 46 of Title 18A of New Jersey statutes. And in the New Jersey law, only the New Jersey law, although other states in the country, it does speak to, and this is from the law, and it just says, each incident in which a seclusion technique is used is carefully and continuously visually monitored to ensure the appropriateness of its use and that it was used in accordance with established procedures set forth in a board policy developed in conjunction with the entity that trains staff and safe techniques for physical restraint in order to protect the safety of the child and others, and each incident in which a seclusion technique is used is documented in writing in sufficient detail to enable the staff to understand the student's behavior over time and use this information to develop or improve the behavior intervention plan at the next individualized education plan meeting. It also goes on to say that a school district, an educational services commission, and an approved private school for students with disabilities shall attempt to minimize the use of seclusion techniques through the development and implementation of individualized, comprehensive, positive behavior intervention plans, inclusion of positive behavior supports, and the student's behavior intervention plans developed by the individualized education plan team. So, and then once an act, is approved and becomes the law, our policy writing entity, Strauss Esme, that Therese referenced before, basically summarizes that and provides a draft policy for the schools that subscribe to their service. We subscribe to Strauss Esme. Strauss's policy recommendation is recommending the policy of restraint and seclusion. And when we get a policy from Strauss, they give us a couple of options. The first option on the Strauss policy actually says, do you want this policy or not? So it's either the Board of Education does not allow for the use of restraint and seclusion, or the board does, and then the parameters go into it. And back in the fall, I don't remember if it was October or November, we did talk about whether or not the board would request the development of this policy. We indicated yes, and of course the committee was convened. So that being said, it is a local decision on whether or not to have a policy that includes restraint and seclusion. I do appreciate the members of the CPAC coming forward. My only concern in regards to seclusion practices, and I've said it to the ladies, from CPAC, and I'm not saying this to you again, but really just for anybody else who hasn't heard me say it, on behalf of the child study team, our supervisors and our director, I hope that we've conveyed to you that the last thing that anybody wants to do in a school district is to use a restraint or seclusion technique. And in fact, I think the very first thing that we talk about in the draft policy is only when a child is in danger to themselves or others. And that those things are just things I want to stress for members of the audience who perhaps haven't been part of the conversation. I know the CPAC hasn't been part of the conversation, but for other folks who had questions or concerns, I really did want to clarify that. And in the beginning of the policy, it says, on occasion during an emergency, a situation may arise making it necessary to temporarily restrain or seclude a student with a disability in accordance with 18A. So in that regard, the state recommends we have a policy that includes restraint and seclusion. I can understand your concerns. In the development of the policy, that's a choice that we have to make as a board. We could seek some additional information. One of the options is to poll the districts in the state to find out who's using restraint and seclusion, who's using just restraint, etc. I know that Charlene provided us, I think, with the Hardiston policy, was that correct? That is restraint only, but not seclusion. I did reach out to Strauss, and I'm waiting to hear back about the number of districts and what's happening in the state, just to give the board a little bit more information. So what I asked for was if they could, and remember for members of the board and the public, they don't represent every district in the state. They do represent many, and I figured they might be the people to say this many school districts have adopted restraint seclusion policy, this many have adopted restraint without seclusion. I know it's important to the board to look at some data from surrounding schools. I have not gotten that back yet from Strauss. Part of the challenge is that when Strauss gives their policies to the district, it's not really their responsibility to follow back and see what happens. It's the local board's responsibility to discuss, put it forth, and adopt it under first and second reading. So they are trying to obtain some of that information upon my request. Other than that, I don't have a personal opinion about it. I would say that as a parent, I can imagine the restraint or seclusion must be absolutely terrifying, and for a child. Again, I think of as a general ed teacher, and I had mentioned this, I think, to just to Mrs. Coughlin afterwards, I said, if I were in a classroom, and many years ago as a classroom teacher, it was always hands-off. There was never hands-on ever, right? Except that in the case of a fight or a very serious situation, if I saw a child who was, banging their head against the wall and bleeding or really putting themselves in harm's way, as a human being, I would step in. Because as a teacher or as an educator, I'm supposed to protect the children. But if I did it, I might do it wrong because I was a gen ed teacher in a music setting many years ago, and I wouldn't have been trained on restraint or seclusion. But I would have intervened because as a parent, seeing a child hurt themselves, I couldn't bear it. So that being said, the seclusion policy, in my opinion, restraint seclusion, at least delineates parameters on how seclusion is utilized, when it is utilized. The positive behavior support is so important. I can't thank you enough for bringing that up, as well as other intervention strategies. Do I think that we're doing a good job in the district? Yes. Do I think we could do better? Always, always. So yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just want to understand, so
Yeah.
I toured that facility.
Yeah.
I have to tell you, if that was my child, it would not be
Yeah.
any type of seclusion. I can't even imagine, and we spoke,
Yeah.
Lauren and I, from a buildings and grounds perspective, that room we felt inappropriate. So
I agree. The first time I saw it, I felt the same way.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it really made you very, very emotional when you saw that.
Yeah.
And do we have the ability to not have that seclusion policy? Is that something
There's
that
still
we
state
can?
law, though.
Well, wait,
That's the challenge.
can I clarify
Yeah.
though, what you're saying and what Teresa's
getting
original
confusing.
question
Yeah.
was, if we're doing the practice, we must have a policy in place.
Right.
But I think the bigger question that's been posed to us by the parents, and that I think the committee itself is asking is, do we believe in that practice of seclusion? Is that a practice we support here in Vernon? And if it is not, then we need a clear alternative strategy that is, I don't know if the word is progressive or what the terminology is, but.
So are we allowed to remove that though?
Right.
So, yeah,
Are
to
we?
clarify, like, the state law doesn't mandate that we use seclusion as a
Right.
practice, correct?
No, it says and Teresa, correct me if I'm wrong, it says that if a child is in imminent danger for themselves or others, that seclusion and restraint is available to use. Isn't that what it says, the state law?
If I'm correct, yes, off the top of my head, I'm not. I'm just trying to think. Yes, the law is there that you can use it, but if I'm just trying to word this correctly, but, and this is, I guess, what I was going back to Karen of, and Lauren just said, is it a practice that we as a board, are willing to use? This is a question, though, that I don't know, only because if the law is there, are we as a board, is that the decision we make as a board locally? Because there's policy that we can handle, but then there's also administrators, how they choose to run the programs.
You'd have to
So-
follow the policy. Yeah.
This is kind of, can we handle the policy? Like, if we went around the
That's my understanding is
table,
we can set the policy.
we can set the
Yeah.
policy, can we set the practice?
Right, the practice.
No.
So the practice, if
Yeah.
I'm correct, I
that's
know
what I'm
you guys actually presenting something interesting to us, so we're just thinking out loud, thank you, because we don't want to confuse the policy with the practice. We as a board, and that's originally what I had sent out, of if we as the board work on the policy, if we have a policy, do we have seclusion and restraint or just restraint? But then what the CPAG brought forward tonight, and what the bigger question Lauren has summarized, is do we as a board value the practice? So that's two completely different questions.
But do we value it, or are we allowed to omit it?
That's what
the problem.
I'm going back
Yeah.
to Karen, because I don't know if that's
I mean, I
Us as a
personally don't
board.
value it. If I
Right,
could
right.
omit it, I would.
Right.
right.
So-
I
But
think-
then, are we overstepping? And
State.
would that be a recommendation from the superintendent from you talking with the special services.
I think the larger issue is if it's part of statute, that it's there and it's available. And if a child is about to hurt themselves or someone else and we don't do anything, then I believe we're in violation of the statute and then we're negligent.
But I don't want to interrupt you, but I don't think
I was
that,
done.
okay. I don't think that the suggestion that's being made is that we do nothing. I think the suggestion is if I just browsed what Charlene had presented, it's a change in culture and it's providing a clear alternative path to the use of seclusion and perhaps also to the use of restraint. It would not be something that we could say tomorrow, we're done with this, because we don't have those, those procedures in place, but it would be a change in culture to how we approach resolving the issues that currently are resulting in restraint and seclusion.
Right, and that's what was discussed at our last meeting. I don't mean to cut you
Yeah.
off. That's what was discussed at the last meeting,
Right.
which Mr. Kendler, Ms. Merrill, and Ms. von Zalzen, they all said their goal is to have zero.
Yeah.
They don't
Yes.
want to use it. And if we can institute these sensory items that they're requesting, that will be another step
We'll minimize that.
before.
Minimize.
So I have a question. Have you, just backing up a little bit, has the committee come to a consensus on the restraint portion of the policy? Have we made significant headway on that part of the policy?
It's all kind of one and the same.
It's one and the same.
Basically, the seclusion part and the restraint part are identical except for one or two items.
Right, so what
have you-
happens is, we went over the policy, we've met numerous times, we even, Nathania came and spent, when we all went to go to the site visit, she was there, and then after the site visit to Rolling Hills, which is CPAC joined us as well, we went to see the actual seclusion room at Rolling Hills, then we went up to Lounsbury Hollow to see the sensory room, then after that, we went and actually had a meeting and sat down. So we've had our attorney involved as well. But what happens is the policy is restraint and seclusion. So what we did was we went through the policy together and we all together gave input of what we want to change. But the actual restraint is a part of the policy that's, I want to say, in a sense there. And what happened is the teachers came in and showed us the training, showed us pictures. We discussed how parents would be notified if a child has been restrained. We went through all the steps of restraint. We discussed the reports, how things are shared. We're starting to discuss timeframes. Interestingly enough, this I found interesting. If the school district restrains, the parents have to be notified. If the school district secludes, the parent did not have to be notified. So we went and added that.
So,
Right.
so, but,
We went at it.
but on the,
That to us,
Yeah,
but
'cause that's
on
the
the practice of
restraint.
restraint, is there like a consensus or agreement on utilizing it and,
From the committee.
from the
From the
committee?
committee. Well, what we did was, we have not discussed this. We were moving forward with restraint and seclusion. And because the teachers came in and showed us the pictures, how it's done, how we went through forward and said we are not going to restrain, no. The CPAC brought to our attention their members' concerns on seclusion, but we didn't discuss, this is all relatively new, but we have discussed restraint. If that's a concern, please, voice as well. We'd like to hear your opinion as well. But we discussed the practice of it, but did we discuss discontinuing that practice as well? No, this is us now discussing
So
the
I guess,
discontinuation of seclusion.
what I'm getting at is to the point of, can we separate the two into two separate policies? Because there seems to be two different schools of thought, right, on the practice of seclusion. So then you have a standalone policy on restraint, and then we revisit seclusion as a separate topic.
No, what happens is you put them together, because it's the way, if I'm correct,
almost, yeah.
the law is written, it's restraint and seclusion.
Right.
So, but if, let's say, now I'm going back to policy, not practice. Let's say the practice is kept, and then we're going to write the policy. There's a whole section on restraint, and then the next section is seclusion. But if we say policy, the practice of seclusion will still happen, but there will not be a policy on it, then it will just be a restraint policy. Unless we, as a district, and again, this is where I don't know, we have to go back to practice, if that's something we want to get rid of one or both.
But if it's a practice, though, we'd have to have a policy.
Policy.
on
That's
it.
what I'm wondering.
That's
How are
the
we
thing.
functioning
Is the
now?
practice is
How are
already
we functioning
happening, and
now?
it's been happening, but we don't have a policy.
So
Have
the-
we,
How
that's
are we
why I'm-
functioning
I
now?
feel like
How are
a
we-
a
how
vote of
following the
saying
law? We're
yes to
following
the
the law
policy
now.
is almost
Okay.
endorsing the practice when I'm not endorsing the practice, but I'm saying if the practice is happening, I'd want it regulated. in some
We need a
way.
policy
That's
to
what we
regulate.
said
I agree.
in
with you.
November.
Yeah, we did.
That's
why
what
we
we said
have
in
it.
November.
Okay.
But, and the charge to this committee was, since we have the practice, we need a policy. The charge to the
Right.
committee wasn't, do
Because the
we?
practice has been going on.
How
Right.
often
Yes.
do we
But
use
just
the
to
seclusion
just to
room?
clarify, I'm sorry,
sorry.
I'll get back to it in a
Okay.
second. Just to clarify, we have been following the practice because it was passed into law in 2018. Again, it was prior to me being here, but when laws happen, we almost automatically do what the law tells us to do, right? Unless there's a governing body like the board that says, don't do that, we want to change, what the practice is. So a year ago, the Department of Special Services started collecting data. So Natalie, to answer your question, I did not bring the data with me. I will tell you that there was kind of a change in the interpretation of seclusion and timeout, and that was thanks to Nathania, to our attorney, because she has been with us, kind of hand in glove through the process. So, in the law, the seclusion technique means the involuntary confinement of a student alone in a room or area from which the student is physically prevented from leaving, but does not include a timeout. And then the other one is a timeout, means a behavior management technique that involves the monitored separation of a student in a non-locked setting and is implemented for the purpose of calming. So we utilize techniques to try to de-escalate situations with children in a few classrooms. I mean, it happens in a few places across the district. So just for the people who are concerned about the practice. So a year ago, when the law changed, the practice began here.
have we sought,
I'm sorry, can I just answer Mark's question real quick? So Mark, exactly, to answer your question, since the practice was in place, that's when, in the fall, I don't recall what month, we went back to the board
Right.
and, said, since this practice is in place and we're following the law, do we want a policy? And the majority said
yes.
yes. So that's when the special services got tasked with creating this policy. But when I took over the policy as chair, I wanted to make sure that we crossed every T and dotted every I, and I wanted to hear the voices from everyone. The parents, CPAG leadership group, the administration, our attorney, the teachers. So from that perspective, I knew this wouldn't be a short thing to do, but it has, in a sense, been one of the most educational. I mean, it really morphed into this topic of there's so many different components to consider, and that's what we're trying to do by creating the policy, doing it correctly, and doing it right. So I agree. If the practice is there, that was our original question. Should we regulate it so the parents have something to know and the district has something to follow? So, I'm
But
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. but I just wanted
to walk you through what happens is the room is like a size of a walk-in closet. And the child goes in there and there's the teacher holding that door shut.
While observing the student.
While observing the student. I mean, constantly there, but I don't know that you would want your child in there. I wouldn't
Well,
want
what's in
my
the
child.
room? Is
Is
there
there
a
a light
chair?
on?
Is there a
Nothing.
beanbag?
No, but
Nothing.
there are reasons for that, and I'm
Right,
not, everybody knows here, I am not, a special ed person, but what I think the special ed folks, might talk about would be that the seclusion is used rather than the restraint, because we don't want to put our hands on children where we could potentially hurt a child by putting a hold on that's done inappropriately. So the reason there aren't chairs or anything like that in there, and we've talked about beanbags
Yeah.
and kind of softening the room. The reason chairs aren't in there is so that a child doesn't hurt themselves. I mean, we did have our behavioral disabilities teacher at Rolling Hill speak with us about this extensively. We do unfortunately have children who, will, in seclusion, could really hurt themselves if there were chairs or other items, there for them to.
They used to have a desk bolted to the floor in one room that they used, and the kid ripped the desk out of the floor.
Lights have
That's
been
why
pulled off the
there's- yeah.
ceiling and.
So we're doing the
Yeah.
seclusion to prevent a child who's acting out from possibly hurting another student
Or themselves.
or themselves,
Yeah.
and to prevent a restraint that might cause harm to the child.
Right.
So then this is another option.
It
Not a
is.
great
I mean, no,
but-
yeah, I mean, nobody's comfortable with it. I mean, I can't think of any special ed person I've spoken to who says that they think it's the best option. In fact, the one thing I think that everybody agrees on is the positive behavior supports and the interventions, and, really taking a look at the, functional behavior analysis and the BIP and seeing what the triggers are for the child is the most proactive thing. Sometimes a child will react without a trigger, and then that behavior has to be analyzed to try to figure out what caused that, behavior, so.
Have we sought a legal opinion from our attorney on the board's authority to ban the practice through policy? Because that, it is in state law and state statute, so
Yeah.
that's the real, what this boils down to is,
Yeah,
do we have the authority
ability?
to ban it through our policy making?
I'd say yes.
Don't we have the ability to, I mean, we can have the policy, but the regulation sets
The
the
practice.
practice,
Practice.
and that
Yeah.
regulation can be written by us to say seclusion is,
Yeah.
we should do all of these
Right.
things,
As the
but
last
not
resort,
do
yeah.
seclusion.
Have
And
we
the-
brought
the
that question to
policy-
Nathaniel yet?
No, but the question in that, if we could do one without the other, the exclusion of the,
No.
To
The
ban the
question is,
practice.
do we have the authority
Oh.
to ban the practice through policy making?
that I don't know,
Well, that's
because
what
it
it
is a
boils
public
down to.
law,
Right.
so.
And
This entire
I
thing.
Yeah.
am,
Yes.
I'm by no means a lawyer, but I just did a governance school class out in Pennsylvania, and state law supersedes policy.
But state law makes it an option. We can say we
I
don't
don't
want the
know.
option as
Do
a
they have
district.
capital punishment in Pennsylvania?
It was at Penn State.
But state law says it's an option.
It's not a mandate.
Right, so can we
It's
as
not
a
a
district say,
mandate.
It's not a
for
mandate.
our district, it's not an option?
I think
don't know.
that question needs to be posed to
Yeah,
Nathaniel.
Yeah, that's
I ran
that's
that
what
on
the
Monday.
crux
You know
of
what,
this
But
is.
the policy is a mandated policy for the board to have.
Right.
So, and I mean, I know this is a really, really challenging topic, and I just want to stress for everybody that our special ed folks really feel that this is only in the event of emergency. They agreed is not a best practice. So but when the law went into effect last year, we followed the law. So that's where we
And
are.
that
we
would be
do
my hope.
before
though.
that?
I'm sorry, but my hope would be that even if we have the policy or use the practice, that we're putting as much time and effort into the conflict resolution and de-escalation
Positive,
practices
absolutely.
as a district that wouldn't have it. Or as a
Absolutely.
state.
And actually, talking about the room and the sensory rooms and stuff like that, Ms. Davino and Ms. Merrill, and I don't know who else, started looking at the schools through a different lens the other day. And they already have some ideas to utilize different rooms than what's being utilized right now for oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to gavel.
As we move into next year.
Yes, Dan.
For
Thank you.
seclusion, sensory rooms, and BD rooms as well.
But to have more on the proactive side.
Yeah.
Because I hear, what the ladies are saying, and again, Mr. Keller, Ms. Von Sals, and Ms. Merrill, myself, the other folks, I mean, it is the last thing that anybody ever wants to do, because we realize that child is somebody's child, So we are looking at our schools with more of the sensory items, that we want incorporated, and more of the options for our students so that we can be really proactive. Unfortunately, when the law passed, like I said, we started doing what the law was. Mr. Sweeney, I heard your question. Unfortunately, I don't know what we did prior to the law going into effect, prior to 2018. I could find out for sure and get back to you, but I don't have that answer tonight.
I'd like to suggest that we do pose the question to Nathaniel to find out if the board has the ability to ban the practice, just so that we know if we do.
Right,
not-
what is our authority
or-
on this?
But what is our authority? I would also, I think the board should make some recommendations. What other information do we need as a board to, make a better informed decision on this, on how to proceed? Do we need examples of other school districts that do not use these practices? How do they then achieve the, the behavior that they'd like to see in the classroom without using these practices? What are alternatives? We talked about the seclusion room, or not the seclusion room, we talked about the sensory room and a
Right.
sensory path. What are other things like that that are positive supports for students that are achievable in our district? Do we need to look at the class size, how many children are in that classroom, and how many BD teachers are responsible for those children at one time, and does that have an impact on how often seclusion is being used? The RNS committee was presented with some data on how often seclusion and restraint is used. We don't have that in front of us, but perhaps that data is helpful to bring to the board. What else? Like I'd recommend, if we can't think of it now at the table, perhaps we can send some emails, other information that would help facilitate this conversation, so we can make it productive for, maybe it's a work session conversation moving forward. Does that sound?
So, I mean, it's absolutely fine with me. Here's the thing. I mean, since we have put in, like I was saying, easily over 12 hours so far, it's been very eye-opening. Understandably, this is a very visceral topic. I mean, I'm an educator. I'm a parent. I'm actually, a special education professional. So this is a very difficult topic on numerous levels. We're all going to have different opinions, and I respect them. I'd like to hear them. We are meeting on Monday as of right now. So if anyone has anything you would like to add, please let us know. If there's information you can think of, feel free to email me, call me, all of us, because then what we can do on Monday is reconvene and figure out, at this point, do we continue under special services? Or is this something that the whole board wants to be involved in? Because I will be honest with you, after all the hours, I mean, the CPAC has been wonderful coming with us. The administration has bent over backwards with their schedules to meet with us. The behaviorist has come, like I said, Nathania. We have been doing everything from our sides, but I also understand that many board members haven't been involved, and I don't want any of you to feel like you're not involved. And I understand this is not an easy topic by any means, so if this is something that everyone would prefer, to move to a full board instead of just the committee base, I'm absolutely fine with that. If the board would prefer that special services keeps going with the RNS, I'm flexible on however we move forward. But I would like guidance on that, because we are supposed to meet on Monday. We have already put in so many hours. We will continue to if need be, but I need to know what everybody wants, and that way we can use our time productively and also learn what you all would like to do. Would you like to move forward with this as a whole board, or would you prefer us to stay committee-based?
I'll speak for myself. I think that the committee approach can be very effective when you have really detail-oriented policies like this. For myself at least, I think the first step is finding out exactly where the board's authority is on the topic of seclusion and banning it or allowing it as a practice. And then perhaps the board, once we know that, we can straw poll where the board feels about the subject and give direction to the committee on what direction the majority of the board feels we should go in with the policy.
But meaning, okay, I'm just trying to get a sense of.
I think because this is a practice we're currently using, and the policy making committee, the RNS policy making committee has put in so much work, I believe that this policy should be written to completion because we are using this practice now, but we need to immediately begin looking at whether or not we believe in the use of this practice.
Right, because we were hoping, I mean,
yes,
like, I was saying to Mark before, the law is in place, the practice has been there, but we don't have a policy.
Yes.
So the way I look at the policy is it's protection and the regulation is guidance.
Yes.
So I agree with what Lauren's saying. I mean, we have to figure out, is this a practice? And if it's, and also with the administration included, and then finding out from Nathania the question Justin asked. But our original goal was to have a first reading for March. So we were definitely moving along. I had originally, it was interesting when Brad said to me, when do you think you can have this done? And I said, summer. And he was like, no. He said, we need something sooner. And I said, well, it is so complex. I mean, to build on what Justin's saying, this is so complex and there's so many different facets to consider and be involved that when I said summer, Brad said, why don't we scale back? Let's shoot for March. And then he said, we'll have our first reading, our second reading, and as long as something gets approved, then at least we have a policy and regulation on the books. But then once that gets approved, we could easily just step into it the following week and continue with it. But now that, the question of practice has come up, Justin's question's very good. You can discuss it with Nathania, and then, from there we can figure out what to do. Maybe on Monday, when we meet Nathania, maybe we could do a phone conference or something.
Okay.
It doesn't seem to make sense to write a policy that we're not supportive of. Let's say, I'm not saying, speaking for the board, but what if we don't want the seclusion practiced?
Right, and
so
that's
then
fine.
Why would we approve a policy that says that includes
No, but
that?
then she would ask, then Karen would be asking Nathania, Justin's question, can we ban the practice by policy?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, obviously.
the answer is yes.
So you're saying
I'm
yes?
saying it is.
Okay, Joe says it is.
My legal background.
So, you know what? It's a yes.
Facetious. I don't have
I know, just,
no
so-
legal background, but
I know, we're just teasing. So anyway, maybe that's what we should shift to on Monday, because I've been trying to be open, but figuring out, how to move forward, and that's why tonight we needed guidance from the board, but again, now it kind of went in a little bit of a different direction. But I also agree with Lauren, if the practice is happening, but yet, here we are, and it's March, and, I don't want anyone on the board to feel as though they're left out. If any of you would like to see the seclusion room, it's open to see. I'm sure administration, myself.
Coordinate that, yeah.
We could easily coordinate that. We could.
But to ban the
anybody
practice,
questions?
we need an alternative. And if that alternative is not in place, set up, and
That's the problem.
that
needs to be in
seems like
place
a
first, yeah.
dangerous place to be for everybody involved.
Right. Proactive measures
the-
have to be in place.
The writing of, I guess I disagree with you, Joe. Like, I do not, I think it would be good if we could ban this practice. But because we do currently use this practice, we need something that regulates the use of it. And so that policy and regulation it stipulates how it's being used and the rules within it. But I don't think we can have a practice that's unregulated, like happening in our schools. But that's not to say that this
is
it
regulated
is
through the law.
through the law.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
but
So the law is standing in for a policy right now.
Yes, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, Lauren, I'm sorry.
no. So maybe
But I'll
yes,
expand
clarify
on
that.
that.
And I did
Yeah.
want to clarify. It's not that it's
Sure.
happening willy nilly by any means. I mean,
Right,
there
right.
are clear steps that the people trained in these techniques are using. It is
Yeah.
it is very clear. However, yes, it's not unregulated. So
No, I mean, part of it is that, when all of the parameters that would occur in utilizing restraint or seclusion are outlined in the law. So it's not like, I guess Vernon just woke up in January of 2018 and said, here's the law, we're just going to do it. They actually took everything that's in the law and applied it to their practice. So everything, now, the law talks about utilizing restraint and utilizing seclusion. Again, I know how uncomfortable this is. I felt the same way when I saw the room. It's my understanding that if we didn't use seclusion, our restraint numbers might go up. I'm not, these are all things to consider, but to help Lauren and the other members of the board understand a little bit more, it does talk about, like each incident in which a physical restraint is used is carefully and continuously visually monitored to ensure the appropriateness of its use. So for example, if a restraint is used, there are only so many that we can use. Everybody's trained in that. And when a restraint is happening, another person is actually only watching, doing nothing but watching to make sure that the restraint is happening appropriately. So if there was a restraint happening and I were observing, I might talk to Mr. Sparta afterwards and say, I noticed that when you had your arm here, it should have been here. Or they're monitoring the student to make sure the student is alert, is breathing. These are very scary situations.
Right. I was just going to say, when the observers there, they are watching the child. That
They
is
are.
also
Right.
why
Yeah,
they're there.
they
as
are.
well. Make
Yeah.
sure the child is breathing okay, that,
However,
so-
there was no
Yeah.
time restraint on that. So that child could be in
On
there
the
for
restraint or the seclusion?
I mean, like time limit. So that child could be in there for an hour until they're able to count down and show that observer that they can come out and be okay.
That's true, but that is
So-
also outlined generally in the child's IEP, where and the reality is, listen, even as adult human beings, Chuck and I work closely together. We're similar in some ways, but we're different in others. So, the reality is that some children, regardless of their classification, can come to school and take out their books and be ready to work, and other kids are shuffling through their papers. So my point is that it is different per child. There are times that are concerning, I think. But remember, if there's a seclusion that's extended, or as soon as this happens, a report is filed, the parent is notified, and the team goes back to the drawing board and says, why did this happen, and how can we prevent it from happening again?
Right.
Every single time. So
I mean, we're doing
Yeah.
everything according to
Yeah.
law, and
that's what I really
our-
want to stress, because
our
I know we have
staff
viewers
is-
at home.
yeah, our staff
and they
is
work
doing
so
an
hard to try to keep our
they do.
kids safe.
And they're
when I
unbelievable.
hear the statistics across the country, it breaks my heart. I mean, this should never, no parent should ever have to send their child to school and worry about their safety. I totally understand that as your superintendent. And I just want to stress that people know that, from what I know, that our people are working really hard to follow exactly what the law says. Like if it says monitor, we monitor. If it says utilize visual, we visual. If it says write the report, we write the report. We've done everything in law in the absence of the policy. I do believe, though, that the things that Lauren brought to the forefront are really important. And I do think we need a legal opinion on this. I don't know if the board can ban the practice.
that's-
I did write down the questions. How other schools prevent the use of RNS that are achievable. I think that's very valid. We've seen some of that data in other school settings, right? In other non-school settings, right? That we've seen. Does class size have an impact? And we have been collecting data from restraint and seclusion and those classrooms, and when it's used, and for the duration and the amount and the students. So I'm very comfortable getting additional data. It's a very, very hard thing to talk about. We're talking about our kids, so I completely understand. I just want to stress for everybody that when the law was enacted, we followed the law. And quite honestly, Lauren, I guess the last thing I would say is that when the Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights went into effect in 2012, that policy is actually quite long. And the Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights is huge. It is a many, many, many page document. But school districts immediately went into the mode of we have to follow the law because it was passed. So even if districts didn't have a policy yet, they probably practiced it. Other districts started to practice the policy of protecting transgender students because that is protected under the law against discrimination. So even if the policy hadn't been made already or created by the board, many times school district personnel will start to be trained in these areas to make sure that we're in compliance with the law because we have to protect the district.
One of the things I once said in a meeting, and this is just how I was thinking, I can't think of a single educator I know of that ever said, I cannot wait to restrain or seclude a child.
Nobody ever feels that way.
And I also said I could never think of any pregnant woman I know that ever said, I can't wait for my child to be restrained or secluded. I mean, so from both sides, it's difficult. So this is a difficult topic. I don't want any board members to feel left out. Ask questions, please. If you want to come to one of the meetings, let us know. If you want to see the seclusion room, if you want to see the pictures of the restraint, we're open, we're available. Thank you very much to the CPAG. They've been invaluable bringing information forward from their members and their own thoughts as well, being parents and educators themselves. So we're meeting on Monday. Right now we have an
So,
RNS.
Let's do this.
meeting
Let's go
scheduled.
around and we'll see if people are interested in keeping seclusion in or taking out, if we're allowed to take it out. In the meantime, Karen can call Nathaniel up to see
Certainly.
if we can. So if we.
So, I'm
if-
sorry, take out the practice?
Yeah, the practice.
Okay.
Okay, so if we can take it out, and if we know the majority of the board wants to take it out, then we can continue with just the restraint portion of it.
Okay.
If Nathaniel says, no, we can't take it out, and the board doesn't, the majority still doesn't want to practice it, if we have to have the policy by law, then we know that we have to go forward with that. Does that sound
Yeah, that
reasonable?
sounds good. That's it.
The only thing I'm not comfortable though, I haven't heard the counter argument. I haven't heard why seclusion is a possible remedy. So for
I don't think it's a
me,
remedy. I
or
think, yeah, I mean,
it's
I
the
think.
situation.
I think what the special ed supervisors would argue is that without the seclusion, the behaviors that some of our children are exhibiting are extremely dangerous to themselves, to others, and to our staff. And that seclusion is one remedy, option, etc., so that the child is not restrained, so that the child doesn't hurt another child, or so that the child doesn't hurt an adult.
And then so we think if we have that ability or that there's that option,
Yeah.
they're not spending enough time on the conflict resolution or de-escalation phase of the situation.
You know what? I would definitely, I would say that we are doing everything that we can in regards to the de-escalation and the positive behavior support, the conflict resolution. Like I said before, we can always do better, always. And that every time one of these incidents occurs, the team goes back to the table and says, why did that occur? How can we prevent it, for the next time? There are times when things happen that are completely out of character for a child, that are unanticipated, that the typical triggers maybe that we've identified for the child that have always set off that young lady or young man had nothing to do with the child's behavior. And the problem is that it's so specific to each child that, for me to give kind of a carte blanche answer wouldn't be fair. It really wouldn't justify the needs of every child who we utilize this for. But I certainly understand where you're coming from. I know you'd like to think that there have to be, if there were 5,000 strategies, that one of them would work for everybody, right? And I.
Well, no, I'm okay having the options as long as
Yeah.
if that is a practice, that it's a practice that's a last resort practice.
Oh,
It is. It is. And I will
So
say
if
that all our
last resort
parents.
practice is gone, then what
takes its place?
what takes its place?
Well,
That's my
Right.
I think the
Positive
concern from
behavior,
the
but,
the
yeah.
special ed supervisors and director would be that without seclusion, that our restraint numbers would go up and we could possibly, have more injuries or injurious behaviors.
But there must be an effective alternative if you have states that
Oh, yeah.
completely abolish or
Right.
ban
No, I
the
agree.
practice. So, that's what it comes down to, finding that
they could be
alternative that's
restraining.
effective.
They could be
They could be
restrained,
restrained.
because that's the alternative,
They could be
right?
restraining, and also our restraints, I can't speak for other states, I don't know, but we don't allow students to be restrained in chairs or anything of that nature, like to strap a child in a chair.
Right.
But another state might allow that.
Oh,
So
you have to compare apples to apples.
That's a
Yeah.
great way of putting it,
And a lot of
apples to apples.
self-reporting also.
And,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of
Well,
self-reporting, and same thing we've learned with the self-reporting, what is considered.
Yeah.
So comparing it could be apples to oranges, because they may allow a student to be restrained and strapped in a chair.
That's what
And-
we have to see what their alternatives are.
Well,
See what
definitely
they're
see
doing
what
Right.
the
in
alternatives
in place
are.
of it.
Here's the other thing, though, to add on to what Mark was saying, and also, granted your question, but the other thing is the law does not have, and maybe Lauren can discuss this from a buildings and ground perspective, there's no, I'm going to use the word regulation, but there's nothing about ventilation, there's nothing about lighting, there's nothing about
Square footage,
size, there's not,
there's nothing.
square footage.
The state
There's
has none of
no
that.
guidance, so it's frustrating because the law was put in place, but then there's no guidance in the law to say to us, this room has to be, between these temperatures, or there has to be, so many square
Enough space for
feet.
someone to lie down or
Right.
whatever. Yeah.
There's no
none-
guidance,
none
and
of
there's
that.
also no guidance on how long can a child be in there. So they put a law in place, but
there's
then
not
there's
a lot of
nothing for us. So then when we
really
do the
ambiguous.
policy and regulation, it's, well, can we say a child cannot be in seclusion longer than 15 minutes? But then it's like, well, wait a second. If, let's say, there's a dire emergency, and then you're breaking policy and regulation. So it's such a fine line. So I understand your point, the counter argument. That's a very good point.
So to circle back to
Yeah.
the information we need to make an educated decision as a board,
we need the question answered by Nathania. Does the board have the ability to ban the practice? We would like information on whether or not there are alternative techniques, or what the alternative techniques are, other strategies that could be used, as well as what is the argument in favor of using this practice. We need to hear both sides. And
What other schools use?
what are other schools doing, and how is this, what does that look like?
We can do that.
Okay.
Okay, Joe, if you had your druthers, what would you do?
If we could, I would not like to have the seclusion
Okay,
practiced.
okay. Teresa,
I agree with Joe.
Michael?
I think if we're doing it, we should have a policy, but I tend to agree with Mark. If it's an option, why is it an option? And if it's something that it's a last resort, it must be there for a reason. And if we could make it a last resort, you know, that would be where I would stand.
Natalie?
I agree with Mike, and I would like to hear from our staff to
Yeah.
see, you know, maybe certainly instances
agree with
where
that.
this is the last resort and what other practices have been tried and failed, you know, prior to that, to just get a little bit of an understanding. And also some of those positive techniques and incorporating those into the policy.
Justin?
I think that I need to know what our legal authority is first, and you know, what the alternatives are, and if they're effective alternatives, before I can really give an opinion either way. But
So even if we could remove it, you would still be on the board as what,
I would
based on other.
not that I'm on the border about it, it's just I don't know enough information. But I would say that I would lean towards being just inherently opposed from a.
Okay, all right, I'm gonna come back to you. Kelly?
I would completely remove it. I just,
Okay, Lauren?
I'd be uncomfortable removing it as a last resort option without a different last resort option
Okay.
known.
All right.
Yes, I agree with Mark, Justin, that I need the other information in order to say one thing, vote one way or another, but hopefully you can tell from my comments that I am concerned about the practice itself and the space. So, yeah, as from a kind of personal standpoint, I do not like the idea of using seclusion, but I do need to know what the alternatives are.
Okay. From a personal standpoint, I don't like the idea of seclusion. I think, unfortunately, it's there for a reason, and is used as a last resort by our staff. And it's actually I think it actually allows our staff another level before going to a restraint. I had said in the meeting that we had with them, you know, as a parent, I would rather have my child secluded for a period of time rather than going from a sensory room to a restraint. So it's I think a restraint, if it happens in front of a classroom, is, you know, hard for all the kids and to take in as well. So the seclusion just gives that another option. So we'll ask Nathania. I think we'll still meet on Monday. And then hopefully on Monday you'll have an answer from Nathania. We can update the board as to what Nathania's response is.
So we didn't give any clear direction.
Yeah,
No,
so
guidance.
So once, so I know you guys are eager to get working on it, but once we do have time to read some of the literature that you provided us with and got in all of that feedback, if we can revisit what direction the board wants to go on this, you know,
Yes.
because I think
I think right now, if I read everybody correctly, I think it's 5-4
Yes.
to continue with the seclusion right now, based on determined upon whatever Nathania says.
what did you say? What did you
think
say?
it's
5 to 4?
I think it's 5. You think it's 5-4 the other way?
Yeah, I mean, for the people that, and I don't, look, I mean, it's not an official vote, it's really a straw poll, but I heard from Mr. Sweeney that I think he would prefer to have the
against.
practice of seclusion
Right.
out. I thought I heard from Mrs. Coughlin, she'd
Same.
prefer to have practice of seclusion out. I thought I heard from Dr. Peak that he thinks that if it's in the policy, it's there for a reason, and I interpreted that to mean that it would be in
Right.
the policy, unless I'm wrong. I assumed Natalie's, Ms. Bucherri's response was similar to Michael's.
Similar, yeah.
Two.
I interpreted Mr. Nunziata's interpretation as although he wants more information, you were the hardest one to figure out what you were trying to say.
I'm sorry.
But I did interpret it that you were not in favor of the seclusion practice.
But you can put me in the no column.
See, I did good then, okay. And then,
At the end, he summarized.
and then from Ms. Mitchell, I interpreted that you wanted it out. From Mr. Chili, that you wanted it in because there must be a reason and wanted more clarification. I felt that Lauren's vote indicated that she wanted it out pending more information, and that Mr. Sparta had it pending in with more
All right.
information.
I had Lauren as
I
in
had Lauren
because
in.
at one point she had said, if we're doing the practice, we should have a policy. That's why I had you in.
If we're doing the practice, we need I believe we
Oh.
need a policy,
Right.
but I would like to vote on this practice being used at all, and I would vote it out.
Okay,
If
all
we
right.
have that
So it's four, five, the
option,
other
but
one.
I cannot
Okay.
in good conscience vote it out without
Right,
being
right.
presented
Having
with
the
that
information.
alternative. I
Right,
think
yeah.
that this vote
Right.
is a,
It's like a.
it's a
It's
very
just a
weird vote to
It's
have
right.
right now.
Yeah.
I mean, we need
No,
some direction.
I'm not
We're
gonna
getting a
disagree.
little bit
I
of
understand, I have the
direction.
direction. Yeah, I have the direction. And, I mean, listen, the conversation is great conversation. The reality is that we're all trying to do the right thing and do better for our students.
Yeah.
So-
Since we really
yeah.
have no direction, let's not meet on Monday until we get information from Nathaniel.
That's
I mean,
fine
it
with me.
doesn't.
That will
I mean,
answer a
we'll
lot of
just-
questions.
Yeah.
really.
It'll be
we
just
need
two.
to.
Huge.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right,
Hopefully I'll
so,
get her tomorrow. She's pretty responsive, but you never know, like if she's in
This is
court.
a little bit involved,
Yeah.
I would think.
Yes.
a little.
For the tag,
Yes.
you did
Yeah,
it
I
for
was
the
just saying,
tag.
it's just
I
a little,
think
the
Joe's
CPAC,
volunteering.
us, the administration.
Joe's volunteering to be on the committee, I think.
I know.
I
To
can't
help
make
us
it.
out.
So we are not
Um,
meeting on Monday, is
No,
that,
we
is that
won't
it?
meet on
No,
Monday.
let's find out from Nathania,
I'll
like
get some
what,
clarification.
and also, if, Ms. Davino, you wouldn't mind, talking with the Special Services
Certainly,
Department,
yeah.
getting an idea, I mean, I'm sure they're gonna
Yeah.
be following up on this
Yeah.
to find out, like, Mark asked, Mike,
Mhm.
Natalie, and Justin, what are alternatives? Like,
Right.
because I agree, I mean, I am not, I've always been upfront that I am not in favor of, restraint or seclusion, but I'm, as the chairperson of Special Services, when I was tasked with this, I went forward due to the majority wanting it. But with that said, I agree, if you're taking it away, then the positive behavior supports need to be there, so. All right, so we will not meet on Monday, you will find out from administration
Yes.
and Nathania, and then we will move forward. And I appreciate the very long conversation. Originally, this was going to be on last week's work session, so we could all discuss it. But then what ended up happening was, obviously, I was absent, and also we wanted to get more information, and that's why it got moved to tonight. So normally, we don't discuss, big issues like this at a public session, but being that we kind of hit a fork in the road, the original plan was meeting on Monday, and we just really needed full board guidance on how to continue, but we got guidance on what to get more information on. So
Yes.
thank you.
All right. Anything else that you? Okay. Steve?
Listed, you'll see your use of buildings and grounds as well as field trips, covering through page 8. And then page 9, I just really wanted the direction from the board on how to move forward with the RFP for health broker services. So I'm really just looking for a final
Okay,
say.
so the question here is, do we do an RFP where we have brokers competing against each other, or do we just have an RFP stating what the brokers will charge us and just still do one broker record, but basically look for a new broker?
I thought we already discussed this.
We did.
We
This-
said we wanted multiple brokers.
We're looking at doing an RFP right now, so we're gonna give Steve direction as to what we wanna do, because he has not had clear direction from everybody around the table if we wanna have multiple brokers shopping against each other, or if we just wanna have an RFP for a new broker. So it's a time for the discussion to see what we wanna do with the RFP, because it all goes on the wording for the RFP. We know that you want multiple. though.
I do.
So we know that. So
3 times.
Mark needs to tell us. what he wants.
definitely want multiple brokers. We're asking the taxpayers to pay more than they ever have. Teachers are losing their jobs. This may be uncomfortable for brokers, but they have to get over that because we need the best rate possible.
Joe?
Agreed.
Michael?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Justin?
Yes.
Lauren?
Yes.
There's your direction. So you put it out where they're gonna compete against each other.
Very good. Letter E, your food service RFP update. I did put out the prescribed RFP for food service. I believe it was in Sunday's paper. So now it's out there. I've sent it to Sodexo, I've sent it to Macchio's, and I'd like to put together the ad hoc committee for cafeteria, really just to go over the RFP. Because in that RFP, there will be the criteria that we apply to determine who wins the RFP. My hope is to come back to this board with a recommendation at the April meeting, so that whether it's Sodexo, different company, that if it were a different company, it gives them some time to get up and running. So that's my plan.
Okay.
And I wanted to update the board on that. Number 2, recommendations. It's recommended that the board approve the following financials as listed, and there was one listed on your addendum.
You want a recommendation for 2A?
Yes, please.
Motion for 2A, please. Ms. McGee, second.
Second.
Ooh, boy, there was 3 there. I'll go with Mr. Sweeney. Questions or comments? Roll call vote.
Mrs. McGee?
Yes.
Mrs. Mitchell?
Yes.
Dr. Peak?
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney?
Yes.
Mr. Nunziata?
Yes.
Mrs. Bucieri?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Cobbin?
Step out.
She stepped out.
Mr. Sparta?
Yes, except abstain on check as noted.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Letter B, it's recommended the board approve transportation as listed below.
Motion for 2B, please.
So moved.
Ms. McGee, second.
Second.
Mr. Chili, questions or comments? Roll call vote.
Mrs. Mitchell?
Yes.
Dr. Peak?
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney?
Yes.
Mr. Nunziata?
Yes.
Mrs. Bucieri?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Cobbin? Mrs. McGee?
Yes.
Mr. Sparta?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Letter C, it's recommended the board accept the Play Unified Grant in the amount of $2,000.
Motion for 2C, please.
So moved.
I'm sorry. Mr.
So
Sweeney.
moved.
Second.
Second.
Dr. Peak. I'm sorry, Lauren just pointed something out
We were
to me.
just
that-
impressed, I was
that
impressed with the
they're
live
actually-
cardiac surgery.
I was
viewing.
wondering why
And the
no one was
list-
going to say something.
No.
I'm
Well,
just,
so quickly.
I have it sitting right
Greatest-
there. So they're going
God
to
bless.
view it. Yes, it's actually going to be a
That's incredible.
big screen and.
Leave the junior mints at home, right?
Seinfeld.
Seinfeld.
Oh my gosh.
Seinfeld. All
It's
right, we
getting
have,
punchy over
we have
here.
a first and a second for 2C. Questions or comments? Roll call vote for 2C.
Dr. Peak?
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney?
Yes.
Mr. Nunziata?
Yes.
Mrs. Bucieri?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Cobbin?
I'm going to abstain from just coming back.
Mrs. McGee?
Yes.
Mrs. Mitchell?
Yes.
Mr. Sparta?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Letter D, it's recommended that the board approve the 1920 payroll schedule that is attached.
Motion for 2D, please.
So moved.
Ms. McGee, second. Dr. Peak. Questions or comments? Roll call vote.
Mr. Sweeney?
Yes.
Mr. Nunziata?
Yes.
Mrs. Bucieri?
Yes.
Mr. Chilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Coghlan?
Yes.
Mrs. McGee?
Yes.
Mrs. Mitchell?
Yes.
Dr. Peak?
Yes.
Mr. Sparta?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Letter E, it's recommended the board approve permitting the following student to attend Vernon schools according to your policy 5111.
Motion for 2E, please.
So moved.
Mr. Sweeney, second.
Second.
Ms. Bucieri, questions or comments? Roll call vote.
Mr. Nunziata?
Yes.
Mrs. Bucieri?
Yes.
Mr. Chilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Coghlan?
Yes.
Mrs. McGee?
Yes.
Mrs. Mitchell?
Yes.
Dr. Peak?
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney?
Yes.
Mr.
Yep.
Sparta?
Yes.
Excellent.
Motion carries.
Thank you. And, Mr. President, if we would, we could take a motion and a second And then I could do the presentation, or I can do it prior to your
I
motion.
think we should do a first and second first, and then have a discussion on your presentation. So
Right.
have a motion for 2F, please.
So moved.
Dr. Peak, second.
Second.
Ms. McGee. Questions or comments with presentation?
Very good.
Okay. You using this?
I am. I'm going to stand up. Right.
Yeah, that's what I just.
Presentation is similar, so I'm going to go relatively quickly. And I'll do a much more thorough presentation for the final budget. And we'll go by cost centers. We'll talk about ties it to the tax rate. But ultimately, we know the challenge has been our state aid trend. And the decrease from what we were told we would get for this current year to our projected 2021 is about $4.5 million of a decrease, which is very concerning. Here you'll see the reductions in our staffing. We have retirements, non-renewals for faculty. We have a non-renewal under administration, maintenance. Our aides are pending final annual review of our IEPs. I think that's important. This is tying it to dollar amounts, which is inclusive of salaries and then their benefits. And you can see in each category, for the retirees, the non-renewals, the aides is pending, and then again we'll have one less maintenance mechanic. That's the grand total. That the budget would have been increased by that much more had we not had those reductions. And again, we have our department, the way we'll spread this out over the various departments. Special ed is seeing a decrease. Math, world language, social studies, administration as one full-time equivalent less. Child study team, language arts, science, the art department, pre-K to 5th grade, phys ed, and interventionists. And these decreases are what forced our hand on is so many transfers that we had to make. If you remember the last time you saw 34, now it's at 33. There's one less transfer than I presented originally earlier last week. As a reminder, the first draft of this budget, you can see on the left, had the percentages that we were estimating. Horizon has come out with its initial renewal, so now we're taking that renewal and we're shopping. We'll continue shopping now with your decision to move forward with the RFP with the brokers. There are some areas of increase. This was questioned last week. So I went through the budget, and these are round numbers, approximates, but our tuition costs did go up. We have a pension liability payment that we have to pay. I'm budgeting $74,000 more than this current year. Our health benefits has an increase. Transportation, although you're going to see in the next screen, we did have a reduction in transportation. So that transportation increase here would have been more had we not reduced. And that's where it gets confusing. Numbers may go up, but along the way, if we make reductions, they don't go up as much.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mr. Kepnes, the tuition is not the tuition that we pay for teachers, it's the tuition that we pay for children.
That's correct.
Out of district.
Yes, that's correct. We do have one of our students is in a state facility. We do have additional increased costs in special education tuition. Correct, that's not for our own faculty reimbursing tuition.
Thank you.
No.
And those are the increases, not the total number.
No, correct. Those are the increases in those cost categories. If I did a quick look at areas of decrease, although technology has increased, we did remove software to the tune of $96,000. We did reduce our busing costs, so although it's increased by 200,000, it would have been 320,000, so we did reduce that due to consolidation. We have reduced counseling services, and then we did a 10% across the board in our classroom supplies, which came out to $47,000.
So these are the only cuts that we made.
No, just about every salary line had a reduction.
Besides salaries, these are the only.
These are the large, significant cuts, yes.
Can, we can ask questions, right? So for the counseling services, one of the things that the board really was honing in on last year was meeting students' needs with mental health. That was a huge component that the board was proactive on last year. So one of the questions I have is, how did we move from expanding ESS to now cutting it back at $100,000 when children's mental health is basically an epidemic in the country at the moment? It's not just us, it's across the board. And that was something that we, were concerned about last year. So that's, on my behalf, concerning that we're taking $100,000 away from counseling services for our students when we're facing a mental health issue in the district.
And we'll have to talk about that with the next slide.
With the what?
The next
Well,
slide.
I have a question. Didn't you, I thought this came up and you had indicated that some of the ESS services that we had budgeted we weren't utilizing. There wasn't a need for it, that we were going to decrease the amount that we were contracting them for.
I don't know that I could say there's not a need, unless I misunderstood. I don't
No, I'm sorry, but I think what happened was, I ended up missing this conversation last time. I had walked out at the last meeting. But what I learned in the special services was we were contracting with them and not receiving, like Karen went to them and said, what else what are we contracted for that we're not getting the services of? So it turned out to be the summer program. So now the summer program is in, and maybe there was something else. Professional development. So they're going to be offering that as well. So yeah, is that what you meant?
Possibly, yeah.
Okay.
I was asking for
Yeah.
clarification.
And just to elaborate a little bit on what Teresa said, although I'm sorry if I'm jumping on your presentation, Steve, but on the counseling services, Teresa, it's my understanding that through ESS, we still have the same level of counseling services that we had before. The change in the ESS numbers would be the servicing of the number of seats that we have with the ESS program. And part of that was because, we have to make budget cuts. Part of it is because when we speak to our school administration and our case managers, there are times that ESS does a wonderful job at identifying children and providing appropriate services. There are other times that they have a choice of whether or not to keep a child in the program or not. And that becomes a little challenging for us, because then if the child is out of ESS, they're still our child, so we still have to provide those services. But in effect, ESS has said, we're sorry, we don't think that the child is making appropriate growth in our program, therefore we choose not to service them. So the decrease in the overall cost is a combination of both. It's a combination of lesser seats for our students between our two schools, the high school and the middle school, but it is more of the things we weren't getting, like summer counseling services, summer services, and professional development. So although we pulled back in some areas, we gained some additional services. And the net difference is the 100,000 on the area of decrease.
So is that 100,000 going to be, obviously it's a decrease, but are we increasing mental health services elsewhere, let's say by employees, to make up for the shortfall of seats in ESS?
No, I think that eventually you will see that in perhaps subsequent years, budgeting that I really can't speak to. We haven't done our long-term projections yet, but we have talked about utilizing perhaps professionals in the district or other people to possibly cut back on the cost of ESS and do it in-house. But we're not there yet.
Okay.
I will say that my understanding of the professional development, the training that ESS offers, many people think is very good, and we were not utilizing that before. But they have been providing a lot of training to our staff, so that does fall into mental health. And I think that's important to mention because even if we don't have an additional person who is working specifically with the children, they are providing additional services in the area of training for our staff, and that's beneficial because it has a wider span in helping, a fuller population of our school district.
But then we'll no longer, like last year, I remember under the previous superintendent, we hired someone just to handle clinical cases at the high school, but we won't have anything like that anymore then.
If clinical cases are in the contract, that I don't know. I don't have the contract with me.
Oh, I'm sorry, I mean
So-
employee-wise.
Oh. No, we don't have
Not a
additional-
case manager, yeah, just clinical. Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I thought we did.
Oh, no, that's fine, because
Yeah.
that's one of my questions, because I'm just wondering, and again, I understand we're under
Yeah.
severe budget restraints. I'm not trying to create a ruckus. I'm just trying to say that that's, literally becoming an epidemic across the country, and that's just concerning. And when I go back to the rings of the tree,
Yep.
I mean, mental health and students, it's, just a big part
Yeah.
to me of the ring, but, okay, sorry, didn't mean to hijack the convo there, Steve.
I do want to ask, are you confident that the resources you've allocated in this budget to mental health and counseling services are adequate to meet our students' needs?
Yes, and I'll tell you, part of it too is that, we're pursuing social emotional learning for every child. I mean, the reality is that, Teresa's right, you're right, mental health is an epidemic in the country. Luckily, I've had a lot of opportunity to understand and learn about social emotional learning and have done quite a bit of training on it in previous employment. So, but not only that, I know that other folks in our district are looking at grants that might help us, subsidize the costs of social emotional learning training programs. We're not there yet, but we also don't have a formalized program to roll out in September either. So, but I do agree that we're paying attention to the epidemic because it is quite challenging for schools. I do believe that this budget does have enough services and resources allocated for our students as we move into next year, but the research is never done. So like I said, we are looking into some grants that might support additional training. Most grants don't usually support personnel, quite honestly. That's something you don't usually find in grant monies. Usually it goes towards services and training. So we are looking into some of those to help as we transition further into social emotional learning in the district.
Okay. So let's talk about banked cap. You remember the slide, and you'll see the numbers through the center there are the allowable uses that you have. So that top left, in this draft of the budget, the tax levy is at $42,283,392. This current year's levy is at the $38 million. So the levy increase for the draft that you have in front of you is up by $4 million. Now, as a reminder, before you go to your bank cap, you have to apply 2% of the current levy. 2% of the $38 million is your $764,000. We have to get to the $4 million increase. We need to get to this increase. So we need $3.2 million more to get to the $4 million increase. Is everybody with me?
Yeah.
So your banked cap is the $3.2 million, and we'll do it in order left to right. You'll use all of the $2.6 million, you'll use all of the $546,000, and you'll use $113,000 of the $441,000, which means you'll have this much left over. We're not generating any in this budget. You'll have this much left over moving forward for a subsequent year. I just don't want any question on your understanding of the 2% increase and then the banked cap. I apologize. I wanted to have a slide. I wanted to have a slide on the tax rate. I don't have a slide on the tax rate. But in your packet, for all of those watching at home, remember we have to split your tax levy from a fiscal year to a calendar year. So when we do that and we have our divide by our net valuation taxable, the total assessments on the average home, about $214,000. The school tax increase would be about $190. So I'll say it again, on an average home, $214,000. The school tax increase would be about $190. And that's over the year. So you divide that by 12, and you can see how much your monthly increase might be for the school tax. I'm looking forward to our liaison meeting, because I think, Mr. Chili, was your suggestion, we look at the aggregate, our levy and the town levy, and we can take a look at that. I'd like to report back after our liaison meeting at our April work session, and let you know what that looks like.
Steve, could you talk to why the levy needs to increase by this amount, given the other cuts that have been made in our budget?
Sure.
Should we return to our seats?
Yeah, are you done with your
Yes,
presentation?
I'm done. Thank you, Ben.
Lauren, are you making reference to the 2,000,007 or so that we're cut out of the budget? I mean, is that basically the question?
Well, no, it was my question also on Tuesday. You know, we're making 2.7 million in cuts in kind of personnel, salary, benefits. We're making some other cuts. You know, I saw technology, busing, counseling, classroom cuts.
Right.
But we're also raising the tax levy
Yes.
to generate $4 million. And so why is the tax levy, why does it need to be raised as much as it is if we're making this quantity of cuts based on the amount of state aid that we're losing?
I'm looking at this sheet. I'm going to come back to the same conversation we ended with.
Yes.
For Lauren. Lauren and I, we stayed back a little bit. We were talking about her question. To me, the two most obvious pieces are your fund balance decrease and your state aid decrease. So if you look from the middle column, 1819, compared to the 1920, you'll notice the 1,785,000. That's the amount of fund balance that was applied this year, and it's dropping down to only 486,000 for next year.
So that's, yeah, so Brad has said $1.3 million difference.
Correct. So we need to make that up. So that's one piece of tax levy need. Then towards the bottom of your revenues, you'll see the $25 million amount going to 22.6.
Yeah.
So that's a significant decrease.
$2.5 million loss in state aid.
Exactly.
So you're basically, between those two numbers, you're at
3.7. I'm sorry, 3.8.
3.8. You can make up about just shy of $800,000 on a 2%, right?
Correct.
Which nets you down to like
Right.
3.1.
So-
That's what you have to let beat me up.
Yeah, it's not, Lauren, I don't have a perfect answer to your question, but it would be whether it's in the increased salaries. Even though we had decreases in salaries, other salaries went up. I showed a decrease in transportation.
Healthcare, the benefits were up
I
significantly.
showed a decrease in transportation of 120,000, yet transportation's going up by about 200,000.
Right.
So it's those increases on top of these shortages are ultimately what's forcing that levy to need to be $4 million versus your 3.8 on the two obvious revenue losses.
Right, because we didn't only lose revenues, we also had expenses that were beyond our control that went up significantly. So it took that combination of both the cuts to our budget in terms of our personnel and staffing and the tax levy increase to balance it.
Correct.
What was the total salary number again, off the top of your head?
The proposed salary number?
Yeah.
You remember?
38.
38.
I went over this yesterday.
Yeah, hold on. It went from
It changed by 1.3, I think it changed.
38.6 to 37.4.
37. Right, 1.2.
I don't understand why we only made, we've had all these meetings, and we've only made $363,000 worth of cuts. How could that possibly be? I mean, you know, if we're running this like a business, which we should be, I mean, we're really only counting then on cutting salaries, and I just don't understand why we're not cutting other expenses, the fat that is buried in here in these line items. I mean, 363 was the best we can do, and then we're just gonna have the taxpayers take the hit.
I think that's a little misrepresenting, you know, because you did mention the salaries, but that is a majority of our budget is salaries. So that is where any sizable cuts will always come from.
But I understand sizable, but if you think about it, Justin, you're going through all these line items, and we can only come up with 363,000, you know?
Yes.
So, okay.
Let Steve answer. Don't break his chain.
It's broken.
There's many individual lines that have decreases. The way I summarized that was late this afternoon, I glanced down, I looked at the subtotals, and I collected what I thought were significant decreases or significant increases. If I went line by line, you're going to see many small increases or many small decreases along the way. Here's a line. It went from $44,270 to $1,200. I didn't include that because I'm trying to find what I consider material, significant. $96,000, $42,000, and that wasn't a very thorough summary. But if you went line by line, you would see more decreases.
Yeah, I
mean,
just
I don't know that I
how-
can just say we decided to keep the fat. I disagree with, this is a very lean budget.
I don't know how we could sit there and approve that budget when, you know.
Don't have to approve the budget.
Well, I mean, it would be my intention not to approve the budget, because I just feel like we need to sharpen our pencils more. I don't feel like we went line by line. We were supposed to get data that said exactly what each line item was. For example, I brought up about the caps and gowns and the graduation. I'm told one time that it was because of chairs and flowers and caps and gowns. Then the next time I'm told, all of a sudden, buried in there was AP testing. You know, I just.
So you want more detail in the notes?
We were told, you had said that you were going to provide that a couple times back. So I can't approve this budget not seeing what all those items are, and can we trim the fat before I push it along to all the taxpayers. That's how I personally feel. I would run it more like a business and not.
Yeah, but the comment of trim the fat is subjective. You might think gowns are fat. I don't. So the board's got to discuss that.
I mean, I talked about renting the gowns instead of purchasing them, because right now I have gowns in my closet that, for whatever reason, you know, the taxpayers paid for, and we have these gowns in our closets.
But I believe that, you know, we've had 5 copies of this budget, you know, and the administration, in providing this to us, is a recommendation of how they would allocate those funds at that point in the budget process. You know, any questions that I've had about budget line items, I have brought to Steve. I'm sure you have and other board members have as well. But to Steve's comment that fat within a budget is subjective, that is really important to this conversation, because, you know, there's a lot of things in here that certain people might interpret as fat, whether it's, you know, extracurriculars or arts or athletics or things like that. But, you know, for myself and for many others, they don't view those things as fat. I'm not saying that you do, but, you know, I think that this has been a very thorough process, that starting from the top, looking at our major cost centers, looking at ways that we can reduce those costs first, and then talking about smaller items,
Well, I mean, I don't think 25,000 for AP testing is a small item. I think that it's unnecessary.
well, we did have a
Now
whole
we're giving
conversation
checks
about that
back.
last week.
You know, I mean, we're giving checks back. I don't understand where we're going to, pass this on to the taxpayer. And I don't know if you can internalize what it feels like as a taxpayer to have an extra $190 a year. And that's on an average home. Most of us, are above, most homes in this area are above that 214. You're adding all the condos and everything in there. You have to think about that. So now I don't take it lightly that we're passing that along. And I feel that we've been promised about these line items that they would be, dissected a little bit more. And then I get an email that's saying, oh, it wasn't 54 for caps and gowns and chairs. The AP testing was in there. Well, what else is in there on those items that maybe we could be looking at? If you were running a business, you would look at all those line items, you would dissect them, and you would pull some of that money out. And 20,000 here, 20,000 there, it all adds up.
But that's been a part of this process. The administration has met with all of
But
their
it's only
principals, all of their
363.
supervisors.
That's just the presentation number.
Yeah,
It's not the whole.
Well, I'd like to see the real number then.
It's right here. You have
These
it.
are the numbers.
Every
We've been given
single one.
5 copies of the numbers.
I don't understand.
I
the
understand that, but
Complete breakdown.
We were
of everything
promised a
reduced.
representation that was going to be more itemized. We were promised that a month and a half ago, and we still don't have that. That's what I'm saying.
Well, this is the itemization.
Right, we have
here.
500
Yeah.
items.
There's,
I think the conversation that we had sort of suggested was not to go through line by line individually as a whole board. It was to, if we had particular questions about line items, go to Steve directly
Right.
Yep.
to his office to get clarification, to see if we could adjust that particular line item. Justin had clearly stated that the goal of the group would be to tackle the big picture, the long-term picture, and that would be most efficient use of time. So that's how I interpret our attack for the budget.
I understand that, but I'm just thinking of what Kelly said, and not to dismiss what you said, but like, for example, granted, I wasn't here last week, but like graduation, I didn't know the AP money was in graduation. I mean, that's not in the notes. I would have liked to have known that, because I did think, what was it, 54,000 was a great deal of money for graduation, but I figured that's the expense for graduation. So I see what you're saying, that within each line item, exactly, you're right, go and ask if you have a question, but I wouldn't think to say, okay, graduation's 54,000, go, and let's go through every single line item, because I see your point too. I don't know, let's just look at something. Substitute nurses, 136,991. Is that what that says? Where am I? I would say, oh, okay. But I wouldn't, for example, if I'm understanding correctly, maybe there's more in that line item than to what just it says there, and there's nothing in notes. So I understand what you're saying, because I didn't know AP was in the graduation, unless that was discussed last week, because again, I wasn't here. But that's something in general that, when I think graduation, I'm thinking of a ceremony, I'm thinking of things that go along with graduation. I don't think of AP exam testing $25,000 as part of graduation. So I understand what you're saying, to have some clarification in the line items, like in the notes, when it says graduation, chair, comma, cap and gowns, comma, flowers, comma, AP exams, comma, like,
if
there
AP
should be
exams is
notes. What?
If AP exams is half of that money,
Yeah, then why don't we,
wouldn't
that's,
it be in
again,
there?
I was absent last week, but why don't we have a line item, say, for AP exams? Like, why was that chunked in with
Well,
is there a
graduation?
standardized,
it's like a chart of, you have a
It's
chart of
like
accounts that
accounting.
you use,
Yeah.
I imagine.
is it
Right.
standardized from, obviously not district to district, because we have 5, 6 schools, so.
I mean, I
Yeah,
could make
that's-
a,
I would never.
Juniors can take.
I was gonna say, because Natalie's saying that, like, not just seniors take AP exams. So to make Mike's point, I mean, yes, there were questions. When I had questions, I came and I went in today just to stop in and say, you know, I had a concern about something and I asked about it. But when I see a line item with a description and no notes, I'm going to take it at its face value. So I understand what Kelly's saying. There's no clarification of what the line items are. So therefore, I wouldn't even have known to question that line item.
But the name of the line, it is a bad note saying diplomas, caps, and gowns, but the name of the line item, it isn't the appropriate line. It's other objects, non-supplies, high school.
Okay, so how do I know that doesn't mean curtains?
Right, but that was why a big part of the process
There's
was
really no
asking
way
those questions.
I could
to
detail
see.
every line. I mean, how would I present that to the
Yeah.
board?
That's what I'm saying. It would be
The concept of
10,000
the
pages
notes.
long.
I mean, and
But
maybe,
that's what I'm
maybe
saying,
this
just
is a really
clarifying
bad
the
presentation.
notes. What?
I wouldn't know how else to do it. The concept of the notes I thought of a few years ago, just to give the board an idea of the kinds of things, in addition to the name of the line account. Sometimes the name of the line
Right.
account.
So all I'm saying then for the future
Not every
is,
line in here is zero-based, by the way.
Right.
It just isn't.
but clarification.
The salaries are truly
on the
zero-based by name. I could give to you, or I could give to you that, but again, that would just be, I don't know if you want that. Our tuition is zero-based by student. Our bus line accounts are zero-based by route. You don't see that, but it's there. I wouldn't know how to present that to you.
I just feel like
There's a lot
I
of
did
backup that
ask
goes
for
in
it, like if you go back in the tapes, I did ask for it,
Oh,
you
I
did
believe
say
you.
that you had that available. I just feel like I'm always asking for data.
Right.
And I'm not getting it, and I'm asked to make a decision on something. How can I make a decision on something if I'm not given the data? I won't make a decision on something that I'm not given the data. And I feel like I'm asking that over and over again.
Well, if you do have 6 weeks until it is finalized, so there's still time for you to get that data. So
Yeah.
I don't think,
So that's the one line account, though, you want, correct?
Well, there may be more,
I
so-
itemized a bunch in the emails that I've been sending, so.
I mean, you have 6 weeks to review those emails and get Kelly the information that she wants. So, all right.
I remember Lauren asked about that line. I don't remember many emails from you.
Well,
The
recently.
most recent
There
one
was
was
just
the,
one.
That's because I
About
emailed
the
all of you
transportation.
together, and Lauren
It sounds like
responded.
Kelly's referring to maybe an earlier email. That
Right.
email, that exchange that we just had was clarifying Kelly's question, mentioning the AP testing, because I
Yes.
realized from her
Right.
question, she probably had not heard the answer
Right.
about the AP testing.
Right.
Maybe it was the meeting that you missed, but
Mhm.
I understood from her question, she hadn't had that piece of information.
Right.
But it sounds
But
like
a
you
month and a
sent
half ago,
a
when
much
that
earlier
was
email.
brought up,
Yeah.
it was never said, oh, AP testing is in there. Because
It wasn't
that
said
would have
at
made,
that time.
no, it wasn't.
you
It
know.
was said last
No.
Thursday.
Yeah, it wasn't set at that time. Yeah. So Kelly, it sounds like you have an outstanding email, though, something else that was not
Yeah.
responded to. So could you resend that to Steve?
Absolutely.
And,
Mhm.
okay.
Thank you.
Perfect.
yeah, right now it's the one line for the co-curricular, which includes graduation and the AP testing.
Why don't you just break out what's,
Well, I
Each
will,
one.
yes.
okay.
So then granted, since I wasn't here last week, what was decided on the AP testing? Did we ever get, because I remember we approved it last year, and then we were going to get data to see did it increase? Did it?
The
well, they
problem
haven't
is
taken the
that
test
they haven't
yet.
taken the test yet.
But did they register for it yet?
Yes,
Some-
yes, we have.
Yeah.
How
So
many
how many
people
people
have
registered?
taken.
Yep.
Done
We
registering,
extended
yeah.
the deadline so that it's March 12th. Well, it was March 12th, and now March 22nd, and we'll know. But there has been an increase in the amount of students that are taking the test.
Like significantly or
No.
by like 3?
No.
Well, however, though, they
Now, wait, and I'm
are
sorry,
paying
number
for
of students or number of tests
That's a
per
very,
student?
that's a very important question.
Yeah, that's night and day.
What you usually see with the AP tests is our top students are taking 3 to 4 AP tests. Some, believe it or not, are taking 5 in 1 year. So you're going to see X amount of tests, and the total amount we have right now does spend the $24,000. So we sent letters to all the folks who had signed up saying that the board was going to pay for the AP exam. But we do have money in that fund for any extra students to make sure that there were students who wanted to take an exam but didn't know would be paid for. So we covered it with a blast to the entire senior class, well, actually, the entire high school, saying that that window is now open for a certain amount of time.
I got the email as a parent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did we ever put a stipulation
That
on that,
didn't
that they have to get
make
a 4 or 5 to get?
No.
No?
No.
I can't remember if we did or not.
No, they'll be reimbursed on May 1st, just as the
Yeah.
testing is starting.
So,
And we
Yeah,
will
that was
fully
my
spend-
question.
I think at this point, the list we have spends the 25,000.
oh yeah, I understand that, but I was just wondering what the data showed, because that's what we were gonna do, was reopen it. We agreed last year under the previous superintendent to pay the 25,000, which I agreed last year, I was
Right.
fine with paying with it, with the premise that we would
Yeah.
see if it was increased,
And that was
so
part of
that's
the
why.
conversation we had last week.
So
and
I'm
the-
asking you, what,
Yeah,
did
and
So
and
let's
what
just
the
wait
board
till
had-
that final sign-up date, Teresa, and I'll get you all the data
you
on.
say March 22nd?
Yeah, so,
Okay.
yeah, once
Part of-
Donna Pachuto gets that by noon, sorry,
No, go ahead.
Justin. And then Donna's going to give me all the data on how many tests we have out, where they are, and I'll compare it to last year.
And part of the conversation last week was that we won't really be able to fully review the data on the AP exams until July, when the scores come out, to see if it was an effective use of the funds or not. And the sentiment by, I think, a majority of those in attendance last week was that you can't really judge the effectiveness of a program or of funding a program prior to being able to review that data.
Let me just ask, effectiveness meaning the effectiveness, more students, I'm sorry, more physical tests being taken,
More tests being taken and how the
Or-
students perform on the
results.
test.
how they performed.
Yeah, both.
So
Depends
we're
on the
using both
desired outcome.
as
Well,
an
the
effective.
performance,
So then we're
performance
kind
data
of
is
stuck
going to be
regardless
difficult.
paying for it.
Because the
Well-
seniors have moved on, and there's sophomores taking it now as juniors,
I
so.
didn't think it was tied to performance. I thought
Yeah.
it was tied to
amount of
allowing
people
more
Yeah, I didn't know it was
students
tied,
to
because last
take
year it
it.
wasn't tied to performance.
But now if we know that number by March,
Yeah,
then
we'll
maybe
know.
that can be a discussion we
yeah, we'll
still
get-
can
we'll
have.
get
for
to
Yeah,
that.
next
because I'm
year's
wondering the
budget.
correlation between paying $25,000 for AP exam and performance. I thought what we discussed last year was specifically, and again, I understand I'm
Well,
opening
I
another
think,
can.
I think part of that is just because, we may have people that are taking it now because it's being paid for, but they're only gonna get a 1 or a 2 on it.
Right, I think that was a concern you raised last year, that
Right.
you wanted to.
It was more of, our people, it was the whole skin in the game conversation
Yeah.
I think we
Yeah.
had, that, if people pay the money themselves, then the people who want to take it, they're going to do their best to go ahead and take it. It's almost like kind of like the park test. I mean, in some respects, some kids go into park tests and they just take it because they have to take it, and they just draw dots on their Scantrons. But I think it was more of a fact of, we want to make sure that the money is actually being utilized to its best ability, and hopefully people are taking the test and we have a higher success rate. Maybe there was kids that were taking the test, that weren't taking the test, that couldn't afford it, that would get 4s and 5s on it. So I think that was part of the evaluation process we were looking. I could be wrong.
No, that's,
But
I
you can't
kind
get
of
the
interpreted
data?
along the way that you did, Brad.
But can we get the data, Chuck?
We can't get the scores until July.
We get the scores the first week in July.
So we do get the scores.
Oh,
right?
yeah, we have.
Okay, we
yep,
do get them.
Yeah,
Okay.
we can do
I thought you
that
said it was
study too.
difficult
That'll be
because
very
there's-
interesting, actually.
I thought you said there
No,
was a
I agree.
difficulty
It's
because some are
just-
seniors. So what does that
No,
mean?
no, I meant that
Comparing apples to apples.
I like the idea of looking at it to see if there was improvement in the scores, because that's always an interesting discussion. But the seniors that took it last year are gone.
Yeah.
So they're not
You're
in
not
that
comparing
pool.
the same group.
You're not really comparing the same group,
Right.
because it really is heavily
Yeah.
skewed towards juniors and seniors.
But that's part of the conversation we'll have when we
So almost half
analyze
the
that data.
group is out.
Well, you'll have the juniors from this year,
Sure.
the seniors.
That's
or
about- that's-
juniors last year to seniors
Right.
this year is the same cohort.
Right,
So you
right.
can compare that.
Same, yeah.
Believe it or not, juniors tend to do better than seniors.
Yeah,
Imagine that.
that makes
Oh,
sense.
that's
Senioritis.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Senioritis.
Yes,
Yeah,
baby.
Of course.
May 1st, May 7th, May 14th, years later it gets.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but that's natural. And we have sophomores taking it.
Oh, wow.
Sophomore bio, big time,
Mhm.
big
Wow.
time. 30, 35 students.
Good for them.
Yeah.
It's a
Yes.
tough exam.
It is, okay, I'll just
All right.
keep my opinions to myself.
Anything else? That anybody wants to discuss about the budget?
I would say that, I want to add, my view on this budget is that even though we're approving it tonight and then approving it again in 6 weeks, many of these items are items that we're still working on, for the community and for stakeholders to know that, we're looking at things, our large cost centers from a very strategic point of view, things that are long-term projects like the healthcare initiative, reviewing our entire approach to transportation, and some other items that, so even though this budget is going to be set for next year, we're hoping to still find savings for the district and for the community.
It actually won't be set for next year until May 1st.
Right, after
Yeah.
that approval though.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna add that I'm not viewing this as a 1-year budget. I'm viewing this as the long-range issue that we're in. And I think some of the comments that Steve made to open up in his president's report about the bank cap situation, I do think.
Steve did?
Brad.
I'm sorry, Brad. Sorry.
He really needs
I
to-
said
late.
Steve
It's-
Brand.
it's almost
What time is it?
He's getting a little
Brad.
punchy.
No, but really rings true. I don't think, I think the one district that had some relief in terms of the payback, it did not have a banked cap. And if we look at the shortfall that we're eventually going to have to deal with and the gap and the chasm we're trying to cross here, directionally, we'll vote in a moment, but I do think directionally this is where we have to be. There's still continuous work we need to do, line item by line item. I agree on some of those, that they're nice to haves, they're not must haves. And but I don't think this isn't, we vote on it and it's done, not now, not in 6 weeks. We're going to continuously look at the budget, and where it's not needed, that'll be breakage year on year as well. So
I want to piggyback on that and what Justin said, that, I agree with what both of you said, so I'm not going to repeat that, but where we've developed committees like the healthcare committee and the transportation, a small committee to look at creative solutions to our transportation arrangement, I would challenge you all, central office administrators, to really see, are there other projects like that, other initiatives like that where we could tackle a high ticket item or a complex item using a group of people who are, invested in it to come up with a more creative solution that's more efficient, that's cost savings. I don't know what those items are. And, in going through the budget, we've found a couple of areas, but maybe there are other areas where we could be more creative. And maybe that's something we can begin in the next 6 weeks, but that's going to be important going forward with this budget to make some of the other bigger cuts that need to happen in coming years. Bigger cuts that don't have a negative impact, that mitigate the impact, I would say, on the classroom experience for the students.
I have some concerns that, I've expressed along the way. One of the concerns that's gotten a little bit more prevalent as the time has gone on is utilizing year 2 and part of year 3 of the bank cap. I think that's dangerous considering what we're facing in year 2, 3, and 4 as far as the cutbacks go. That being said, even if we're only utilizing year 1, I still wouldn't be supportive of the budget. I told Karen when she started that I very rarely support the budget. I always think there's more that you can do to the budget to make it more efficient. This time is no different. I fully understand the strategy of using bank cap to raise money now that will be there continually for the next 5, 6, 7 years. I totally understand that. It goes against every fiber of my being to do that. That's the only, that's where I'm caught between a rock and a hard place. But I do think there's some real questions with the budget as to where we go between now and May 1st, considering that use of bank cap.
Could you remind us, with the bank cap usage, year 1 of bank cap was this much money?
2.6.
2.6. Year 2 was
$551 or
$540,000.
something.
And then,
3 or 4.
and then we're tapping into
Yeah.
year 3
Yes.
also.
Yeah.
Between now and then, between now and May 1st, when we're doing our final approval, could you set a goal of trying to find year 2, you know, that portion of year 3 and year 2's worth of bank cap in this budget to remove? You know, continue to dig, continue to remove, so that we have.
Well, the answer is we don't stop. I don't want to promise a number, but yes, I hear you. I really do.
I make sure you do.
It's okay.
That's why Kelly
I mean,
sits
that's
next
what we
to you.
do.
That's why, I just keep on
her right
whispering.
You're not approving, I might take a day or 2 off on budget, because I have to, but come Monday, we're back at it. We don't stop. I love the goal. You said it, and that's an ideal to me. Can we get there? I hope so. Chuck said, but some things just happen naturally. Retirements may come in. That's not your point, though. Your point is other areas.
Right.
So, no,
Well,
we will
and-
continue the good work.
And you do have, the consultants starting to shop the other markets now. You know, we're only,
That would be
I
a
think
big
it's
deal. That would be a big deal.
$500,000 away from having, a flat from year to
That would
year.
be a big
Granted,
deal.
it's still an increase because we're losing, I think it's about $600,000 in benefits through retirements and non-renewals. But there's a big goal if you can get to even just flat, which is a net of 8.5. That's only another 4 or 5% off of the 13% that you have. So if you can get there by shopping, I mean, that's 500,000 that,
Right.
hopefully that you can return to.
I just don't know that we're going to have a
Right.
final rate by May 1st. So it might come to hedging our bets on that. And I heard what Justin had said, he'd be concerned with that, but, I mean, if
Concerned with what?
Just lowering it based off of a hedge rather than
Oh.
a firm number.
Yeah.
Because if Horizon did come out with a 13.1 on medical, I'd say it's going to be less than that, because they're going to compete with the Aetnas, the Cignas, and the AmeriHealths. And today, it's 13.1 in the budget. So if we penciled in 10, right there, we're hedging, but they're going to come down from 13.1. I think we need to be realistic and do that. Now, in this draft, it's at 13.1, but for your final draft, it's going to come down from that. And if we don't hear from our carriers, the competitors, I'm going to recommend a lower number than 13.1 anyway. And that would get us closer to that goal, Lauren, of not using all of that bank cap.
And then we have that available next year,
Yeah.
when we're in
Yes,
this,
exactly.
a very similar
Situation.
situation.
That's a
And
great
if not-
goal.
If we could only use what's expiring.
Yes,
Yeah,
only
exactly.
use what's
That's a
expiring.
great, yeah, well, because we're not generating any more along the way anyway.
No, that,
So,
those days are
We
gone.
must use what's expiring,
Yes.
but if we can just use that first
Yes.
year to save the next year
It
for.
gives us that little
Yes.
bit of, to fill a gap in
It's
subsequent
your rainy
years.
day fund. Or
It is an-
it's like a sprinkle fund, not a
But
rainy day fund. at that
We're
point.
600,000 off that, right?
Yeah, 5, 6,
Yeah, about
660, yes.
Yeah. This process is hard every single year.
Oh, it's,
and
yes,
having
and
that
it's only getting harder.
amount.
And remind me, if it, instead of 13% on medical, if it came in at 11,
It'd be like
It's
180.
about 90,000.
90,000 percentage point?
Yeah.
It's about
Hold on.
Per 100 basis, it's about
I got
90,000.
13.1, so let me type in 12.1. So that's about $79,000. Call it $80,000 for every 1 point.
So if you were down to 11, that brings you to 500 off the mark for
Right.
saving yours.
Brad,
Right.
when you stopped in yesterday, we wanted to get to a certain level.
I think if you got to 8%,
It was 8%
I think it
that
made it
did
level.
what?
It made it level, 85 to 85,
Okay.
8.5 to 8.5. That's taken into account payments from the teachers as well. So it was a net on it.
and that'd be about 400,000.
Yeah, yeah. Because I think now we're at 9, and I think it was like 8.5 or 8.6
Yes,
is what was
and what I budgeted.
projected.
Then
So that's
you-
the other thing too. You still have,
the two
you
caps
still have
in
three,
years
four months
sitting
to
there.
in the school year, so there's 3 months of unknown of premiums, so.
Steve, could you give us, if you have to, follow up on this by email, but give us a real number on the decrease in budget? You gave us 4 major line items:
Yeah.
technology, busing, counseling, classroom. But I think, to Kelly's point, there are other things in there that are decreases that may not be captured in that.
Sure.
And when we look at the total on this budget line, there's actually, we have an increase in our budget, so we
Yes.
can't actually do the math ourselves, sitting at our seats. Could you go through and anything that's not salary and benefits, give us the other number that's been removed from our budget, that's been a decrease? Not just in the 4 categories, but total?
Or even just the net up and down of anything non-salaried and benefits, right? So what is the net decrease?
On individual lines?
I don't require the individuals, I just would like to know that total, right? I just totaled up those 4 and it's 360,000, but I imagine there's other, there's 2,000 here, 5,000 there.
So on an individual line basis,
But I don't I don't know, maybe the other board members do. I don't need the individuals. I'd like to see that that total decrease
So
in
you-
those other categories that aren't
So are
salary
you
and
asking to
benefits.
separate out first anything
mean, I
that's not
can.
salary and benefits?
Yes.
the
and then
challenge with
anything
doing
a
that
decrease?
is every
Right.
subcategory, subtotal, has salaries in it. The nursing subtotal has the nurse's salary in it.
Uh-huh.
So you have nursing uniforms.
Yeah,
Like
so
in that
it turns
subtotal.
into an exercise of line by line,
Like it has
which
health
I
subtotal,
can
which
do,
is
but
not
it's not,
salaries in it.
No, I see.
that's
I
the
see.
problem.
I
In
see.
transportation, there's salary built in that, in addition to the routes.
I see. Okay.
Which is kind of why I did it quickly. One, it was
Yes,
a time
I
issue, but
understand.
2, I mean, the answer is yes, I can. It might be more detailed than you care to see, though.
No, that's okay, and maybe it's a needless task, to put in perspective what's being cut out of the budget, these tangibles versus, the salary and benefits, which are, people.
And remember, you call it cuts, I call it a reduction. One of the exercises I go through is I look at historical trends. I remember a young superintendent in their interview talking about looking at historical trends. And when I look at historical trends and I see that historically we've spent less on that area than I budgeted now, I'll reduce it based on the historic. So I reduce it, but I didn't really cut anything. Because the larger number, maybe in this current year, looks higher, is because I missed the mark when I budgeted. Because historically, we've spent less.
Right.
So I can't give you, we're not going to buy these, when the fact is, today's number might be too high, therefore I'm reducing the number based on the past 3 years of spending. So I can't tell you the things that aren't going to get purchased, but I can tell you, here, this
It's
is
an
a silly
intangible
one.
cut.
Yeah, in
is what it
uniforms,
is.
I went from 200 to 100 on this one line. I mean,
It's arbitrary.
it's arbitrary.
It's not arbitrary, there's one less nurse there.
Some of them are arbitrary. They look arbitrary. You're right, Joe.
But could you just explain so everybody understands, like you just said, a line item for transportation, there's a salary in there. What
Yes.
does that mean? So,
Well, that's
everyone
the
understands.
coordinator's salary.
Jamie's put in there.
Yes.
Right, but in one line item, not multiple, correct?
As a
Yes.
Just in the
subtotal,
transportation.
the
Right.
subtotal.
I mean, if you go through with these subtotals,
At the
Oh,
end
see,
of
I was
each
talking
line.
line items, that's what I was thinking.
right, but, let's see. On page 1,
Look at the health sub.
health sub, yeah.
There's all
Three-
salaries
most of the
on
way
the
down.
top.
Over to the right, you'll see $610,946. But that's the total for that.
Oh, no, I'm not talking for I meant line item, that's the part I thought you were talking about a line item, that there was a salary mixed into that.
No,
No,
I mean,
in the transportation category.
The
Yeah.
category,
Exactly.
okay,
So
that's
that
what
every
was throwing me off.
subtotal will likely have salaries as one of the
Yeah.
line items.
Well, yeah, that I understand.
But to Lauren's request, it would be a line by line to extract the salary lines. And
Yeah.
Right.
let me see what I can put together.
Well, yeah, but I wanted to go back to something that you just said, where in your process of reducing these numbers in the pink column of our budget, I guess I'm only just understanding now, these are just arbitrary reductions in numbers, but not actually saying, we don't need these things next year, or we're going, or look at how we're using this, where we've decided this is extra or this is unnecessary in our schools for whatever reason, we're going to cut out that cost. We're going to physically take this thing that we had been using and now we're going to take it away. We've only done that with people, with our reduction, with the
No, I think,
salary and benefits.
I think if you, I'll use fuel oil for an example, all right? So we've been buying fuel oil in this district for certain schools for years and years and years. And we probably have a pretty good idea of how many gallons we use per year per school in
Right.
fuel oil.
Depends on the winter, right?
And then you'd go ahead and put over a period of 10 years, you have an average of gallonage that you use. So if you have an average year, you're going to be pretty spot on if you could ballpark a price. And if you have a very cold year, you're going to be a little off.
You're short, right?
But if you have a warmer winter,
Yeah, breakage.
then we're breakage. So I think where you have history, and you could probably even do that with supplies to a point. In supplies over time, they go up and down. So over a period of time, you should be able to get an average of that and use that.
Yes.
That would be
Now, you did, though, make actual cuts from the budget, right? So
Yes.
you went to all of your supply accounts and cut 10%, right,
Correct.
from every
Because
single
the
supply account.
classroom supplies, I want to give the principals some ownership of their budget. So we come up with an allocation for them to spread over departments, and they spread it, I give them one lump allocation, and they will spread it over the departments. And then they return that with an inventory and how they want to spend those funds.
But you're cutting that by 10%
I took
for
that,
next year.
correct, I penciled that in, and then I call it arbitrary, we reduced every line by 10%.
So then
And
those
that
principals
generated
will
a savings
receive,
of $40-some thousand.
right, so their allocations were,
They
all cut
yes,
by
are
10%.
reduced.
And then where did, let's say, that 40,000 go?
Nowhere.
it's out of the budget.
It's using less, it's
Right.
using less banked cap than you would have needed otherwise.
No, I understand that, but.
But what were the cuts, are you saying?
Yeah,
what
but
are the
see,
things?
that's going to the point of, I don't know if this piggybacks on Kelly, it's just getting so late, I'm getting to a point, I wouldn't have known that. For example, the 10%, maybe you've nested it in the past, I'm not on the finance committee, so I'm not going through this, I don't know 10% or, those are the kind of things that I believe we should all know. That,
Well, that was one,
10%
I did
taken
highlight
out.
that one, the supplies for the 40-some thousand.
Okay.
Yeah,
Just exactly where were cuts made? We just looked
So they're
at
within those
4
buildings.
items.
So every principal received 10% less in their allocation.
well, they haven't received
Or
anything,
they
but
will
yes,
be receiving, and
yes,
then
Exactly.
they just won't be able to allocate 10%
10%.
less in their building budget. So they'll have to find those cuts within their buildings.
We could still say we want 11%.
Yeah.
It's not set in stone.
Right, we
now.
could say cut 15% from every supply. It's 47,000 with the 10%, right? So you get
That's right.
So every percentage that you cut,
$4,700.
you save $4,700.
I'd be careful. I'll give you an example. Let me go to it. Hold on. Let me go to Glen Meadow. Industrial Arts Tech, Glen Meadow. Edwina originally put within her allocation, $2,700 for that department. $2,700. We reduced it by the 10%, so she will be receiving, assuming this were the final, $2,430. I'd be hesitant to go more on the classroom supply lines, because some of them are here. World language, they allocated $1,800, $1,800 in Lounsbury world language. So now they're down to $1,600 with the 10%. They have to buy class supplies for these departments.
And supply costs don't go down.
Hmm?
They don't go down. In the
But
budget.
supply
Supply
costs.
costs. I
Supply
thought you said
costs.
costs. Yeah, supply costs,
they
right.
don't.
Exactly. So they're going to buy less.
Right.
That's a true cut, as opposed to, that's not the historic analysis. Historic analysis comes into play on facilities.
No, but I was trying to say, because I think Lauren was interpreting your cuts to mean that they were only paper cuts, that they weren't actually reductions in our purchases and our acquisition of materials. But you have done that. Every building is going to receive 10% less in their budget to operate next year in terms of supplies, materials, and all of that.
Just curious, this may not be information you have, but because you froze spending this year, did we know at what was unused from a supply perspective, or?
I won't yet, but I'll have a better answer as we get further along in the year. I don't know right now.
Yeah, okay.
I wouldn't project that. I did project it.
Project it.
I think I projected
Yeah, but-
25,000
Yeah.
in fund balance. If there's more than that, it will be, remember, it's not a waste. It will be, through the auditing process, they see that, and they'll be determined as excess fund balance.
Right.
And then they book that in our audit to be utilized in 2021. So we're kind of spreading it, which I think is a good thing. It's a good strategy.
I think the budget freezes early on will be de rigueur the next 3 or 4 years.
Oh, my God, yeah.
Right after their budget is set, it'll be frozen.
Yeah, I know. I did
it's
joke
gonna
with
be a
someone
different-
today.
And,
They were thinking they were ordering for next year, and I said, no, it's already frozen.
and to Lauren's point on looking at areas, I think, and this is on me, that we put a team of people together, and this is a 12-month process. This doesn't start in October, November. I mean, we need to start now at cost centers, and we got to
Yeah.
strategize more than we ever have had to.
Negotiate.
Yeah, the finance committee is going to meet next week, and we're going to continue to meet after May 1st
Yes.
on a very
You guys
regular
give me
basis.
great ideas. I rely on you guys.
Right.
So.
Can we call a vote?
Before we vote, I just want to say thank you for putting in, all the hours between the finance committee and your individual work from
Yes.
central office in going through this and going through this and going through this. And we are going to continue to pepper you with questions by email and in person, so prepare yourself.
No problem.
Okay, roll call.
Mrs. Bucieri?
Yes.
Mr. Chilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Conlon?
Yes.
Mrs. McGee?
Yes.
Mrs. Mitchell?
No.
Dr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney?
Yes.
Mr. Nunziata?
Yes.
Mr. Sparta?
No.
Motion carries.
Okay. I think that's all I have.
All right, we'll move to public participation for items on the agenda and any other business. Seeing nobody here, I will close it to the public. I'm giving Chuck 10 minutes to talk about Clark.
Nope, I don't even need 10.
It's in your update
Superintendent's
thing, superintendent's report.
The scores are embargoed every year for a certain period of time, and then they're released. So on March 12th, which was this week, our scores from last spring were released to the general public. And that's where the New Jersey Herald article came out. They actually got our ranking wrong. So I just wanted to clarify that. When you talk about Vernon Township High School ranked 4th out of the 14 schools in the area in language arts, or in English, with their Park ELA scores. So they were behind Mount Olive, Jefferson, and Kittatinny, but then Vernon was the next school. 61% of our high school students met expectations or exceeded expectations in language arts, in English. In math, we ranked 7th out of 14 schools in the area. We're behind Mount Olive, Kittatinny, Sparta, Lenape Valley, Hackettstown, and North Warren. And 34.7% of our students met expectations or exceeded expectations. So that was the news out of the high school. So that was important data. The other important data that we're looking at constantly is Glen Meadow. Glen Meadow is a target school based on a small percentage of students in one group, one special group. And we've been watching that rating closely. Now remember, we heard about our target assignment about 8 to 10 weeks before the spring test last year. So we immediately put a blitz in to try to make sure our students were prepared for the test, to make sure we could do everything we possibly could. But we weren't really able to get the literacy lab and the math lab set up until this year. So we won't see the results from that program until the kids take the test this spring. But the blitz did help us with the Glen Meadow group. So language arts for our the special ed band, they rose to 20% to meet expectations or exceed expectations. That was very significant change. So in Glen Meadow, where there was a problem with the amount of students who took the test in special ed, the amount of students who passed the test in special ed, and percentage of students that met and exceeded, all of those things have been removed. The only place where we're still struggling, based on last year's tests, is in math. Now, math went from 2% meeting expectations or exceeding expectations to 6%. But that growth was not enough to meet the requirements for this past year. They were looking for us to be at 11%. So our goal this year, when they take it in the spring, is to have 18% of our special ed students pass the math test. The language arts level, if it stays even at the 20% level, will be enough to get us through. So last year I told you that 2 years in a row as a target school, you become a comprehensive school, but that's not the way the state looks at it. Because we only had one small section, we're still a target school, but this next test will really decide what's going on. So we have our program, we have our literacy labs and math labs, we have all of our students in there. We're using Linkit this year, so we have tons of data on the children. We know where they've been evaluated. We've moved some of them out. Some of them have graduated from English or they've graduated from the math program. And now it's all hands on deck as we move towards the test this spring. So I just wanted to report that out to you. We'll have the math supervisor and language arts supervisor talk to you and give you a global perspective, or at least the gestalt of what we're trying to do. But I wanted to make sure you got this information. Okay? That wasn't 10 minutes.
It was not. No. I was going
Were
to
you
set a
timing
timer.
me?
I was going to set one, but I
He
didn't.
told me he was gonna tell me.
Okay.
Letter P, open board member forum. Anybody have anything they want to add?
I'll be brief, because it's late, but I know back in I think the reorganization meeting in January, we talked about doing some work as a board, as a team. And there was that survey of topics that we could choose. I just was wondering where that stood, because it's been about 90 days now, and there's tough times ahead of us, and I see tough times galvanize a strong team or tear apart a weak team. And I see opportunity for this team to be stronger, have higher performing behaviors, and I think a session like that shouldn't be forgotten. I think we should revisit that. And
I don't think I got everybody's. I got your response within 24 hours, I think. Let me find those. Does everyone remember the email Mark's talking about? And I can resend it. All right.
resend it. I don't remember who responded.
I just have one thing I want to put out there. Wondering if we could ever consider having our high school graduation on a Saturday and fix it on a Saturday.
No, I like it.
Huh?
I like that.
So that way we give time for people to come in. It's easier for people who don't live in town, have family members come in and witness graduation. It gives the people who are graduating opportunity to have a function on the weekend for them, rather than trying to go out to dinner
Like a
at
Saturday
8:30,
night.
9 o'clock at night. Stuff like that.
Used to
And
do in high school.
it's something, I think last year with us having the graduation before the exams because of extenuating circumstances, showed us that we can at least set a graduation date far enough out in advance and utilize a weekend. It helps out with chair rentals, because now we only have to chair rentals for 2 or 3 days rather than possibly longer. We could have the 8th grade advancement on a Friday night, high school graduation on a Saturday at 10:30 in the morning, so we're not in the heat of the day. So
If we can open a discussion with the union on this. Yeah.
Yeah,
why would
my-
that even be a union
Well,
discussion?
the question
don't
I
have to
asked
come
Chuck
in on
was,
a
I don't
Saturday.
know if our teachers are required per contract to attend the ceremony. That I don't know, so that was the question I asked of Chuck. In some districts, the teachers are required to attend certain events, so I don't have the answer to that, so.
Well, there's a 5-night back, that
Right.
we could,
Right,
you know,
sure. We
play-
just have to take
play
something
with
else off, right?
So
Yeah.
something to consider.
But for
and
families
discuss.
coming in from out of town, it is, especially when we have graduations on like a Monday and Tuesday
Yeah,
night,
yeah.
That's
it's
rough.
difficult.
And then
Yeah.
dinner's crazy.
I know there's a lot of schools around the country that do that. And I think it's to cater to the family and let everybody who can come to the graduation come, so. Anybody have anything else? We're open board member forum. With that, I'll take a motion for adjournment.
Motion?
Ms. Macheri, second.
Second.
Mr. Chili, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We adjourn.
I feel like more than.